No, but Sam's really good program as far as
We're going to convene our meeting shortly. Everyone could please take their seats. Good evening, everyone. We will call the City Council meeting for Monday, May 5, 2014 to order. First order of business is the roll call. Charlene.
Estes. Peterson. Lewis. Doyle. Wright. Scott. Nordstrom. Roberts. Clayton. Lorente. We have quorum.
Thank you, everyone. We are now on to our invocation. You're welcome to participate, but not required. And we have Roy Roberts here tonight from Outreach Church.
Let's bow our heads in word of prayer. Father, we just thank you so much for this night and these individuals, Lord God, who make the decisions for our community. And Father, I pray that tonight that your hand would be upon them, that you would guide them, give them wisdom and discernment, Father, in all the decisions that they make. And Father, we just pray you'll bless their lives. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Pastor Roy. We are now on to the adoption of the agenda. Are there any additions or changes to tonight's agenda from members of the council or staff? We have a motion by Scott and a second by Nordstrom to adopt the agenda as is. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are now on to our awards, recognitions, and proclamations. This is a tradition that was started a couple of years ago, and it's a tradition that we are continuing. That is having an annual Holocaust proclamation. I have Ann Stanton from the local synagogue here, and also Paul Priest, a decorated World War II veteran and a survivor of the Battle of Remagen. In just a moment, they will come up, but before they do, we are going to proceed with a short video that we have regarding the Holocaust and a local connection to the Holocaust. It's about 12 minutes long. Bear with us. This is important. We do this just once a year. Go ahead.
It is not easy to lay still for 1 minute. You try to lay still for 11 hours in a pile of dead bodies. And you have to remember what will go through your mind when you lay there. And finally, that I could be able to jump up. I didn't expect that after laying there for 11 hours. But I made it. There was just one German guard walking around the pile of dead bodies. I was able to jump up and kill that son of a gun. I took his uniform, and just at that time a truck came And they said, I was in uniform. They said, gehen Sie nach Weimar? In other words, are you going to Weimar? Yeah. He thought I was going to the girls and the beer and the booze, and I didn't mind that. So, yeah. So I got at the camp gate, and I was lucky I was the only one on board of that truck. I was sitting all the way in front. And of course in uniform, and I took his rifle too. I made sure that I had a weapon with me. And he looked at me and he said, okay. And I went out of camp. Then I came at the second gate, the same thing. And I thought, gosh, I never knew it was so easy to get out of a death camp. But it was all my luck. When I came out, I came in a farmer's house, and the farm woman at that time asked me, what can I do for you? He said, I'm hungry and I'm lost. She said, no, why don't you come in? Later on, when I talked to the family, I found out that this woman knew that I was an escapee of Buchenwald. And he never said a word, because she laid her own life on the line, because if the Gestapo would have found out that she would have helped me eating and giving a place, she would have been killed too. So just to show you, I don't hate all the German people, just the Nazis. And believe me, I took care of a lot of them. They cannot speak against me anymore. But I have lived in all this time here in Rapid City. It is over 55 years now. It is a good time. It is a good place. When we look on the coast, what's coming up now in New York, they can have it. They can have it what they have in California. And we're sitting here with 60, 70 degrees, and you just look up and like there's nothing going on. So I love Rapid City and the people in it. Thank you very much.
Memory is what shapes us. Memory is what teaches us. We must understand that's where our redemption is.
I think the important thing to understand about this cataclysmic event is that it happened in the heart of Europe. Germany was respected around the world for its leading scientists, its physicians, its theologians. It was a very civilized, advanced country. It was a young democracy, but it was a democracy. And yet it descended not only into social collapse, but world war and eventually mass murder.
A strong man came to power in Germany whose ideas were that Germany has to create a national community which would include only the Aryan race, which he considered superior, and all the people who did not belong to the Aryan race could be eliminated. With planning and propaganda, he was able to convince most of the German people to go along with him. insensitive to what happened to the Jews who had basically been their former neighbors. And he managed to build concentration camps and killing centers and finally gas chambers to annihilate 6 million Jews, and at the same time also millions of others murdered in a systematic government-sponsored way.
And it's made up of so many people who participated in different ways, who made it possible.
People who follow orders without question. Bystanders who watch and do nothing. Ordinary men and women simply going with the flow.
The events and the results of the Holocaust were so devastating. It was an extreme that we can barely imagine.
So mind-boggling that the temptations to forget and to repress, to just put it out of mind, are very real.
But we remember. We remember because it is an unthinkable scar on humanity. We need to understand what human beings are capable of.
We gather today to mourn the loss of so many lives and celebrate those who saved them, honor those who survived, and contemplate the obligations of the living.
Days of Remembrance is our nation's annual commemoration of the Holocaust. This time that was both a blight on the history of humanity, but also a shining moment for the people who were brave enough to put an end to it.
We are remembering, first and foremost, all the victims. And that is not only the Jewish victims, but there were many non-Jewish victims. Of course, the Jews were the primary target.
The millions of innocent people, including my family and friends, who were killed because they were of the wrong religion, because they had no means of protecting themselves.
It's also important to remember the rescuers. These were people who risked not only their own lives, sometimes the lives of their family, to save a fellow human being. And we also remember our American soldiers who were fighting to win World War II, and in the course of that, liberated these concentration camps.
Those that arrived at the camps in 1945 and were just horrified with what they saw.
That was a huge task for the American soldiers to help bring humanity back to these people who had been dehumanized for years, to give them medical care.
Looking back allows us to understand how important it is for us to serve in a country where we have the strength and the might and the will to defend those that are defenseless.
So Days of Remembrance is an opportunity for us to remember the suffering that was and the efforts that were made to put an end to such suffering. And it's a call to conscience today in our world to make sure that we aren't the silent ones standing by, contributing to the suffering of others.
In 1945, at the end of the war, I would have thought that there would never be another Holocaust, that the world was so shocked by what had happened, that the world would not permit that. And yet you see what happened in Bosnia, what happened in Rwanda, what happened in Darfur. So there's still millions of people being persecuted because of their ethnicity.
It's really a moral challenge to us to do more in our own lives when we confront injustice or hatred or genocide.
Those who suffered and died in the Holocaust, we can honor them today by not being silent. Remembering ties the past and the present together with a powerful, simple thread. This is not right.
The important thing is that one should not become indifferent to the suffering of others, that one should not stand by and just raise one's hands and say, there's nothing I can do, I'm just a little one person. Because I think what every one of us does matters.
It's not enough to curse the darkness of the past. Above all, we have to illuminate the future. And I think that on the day of remembrance, the most important thing is to remember the humanity that is in all of us, to leave the world better for our children and for posterity.
Is Ann Stanton here tonight? Ann, were you able to make it? Come on up, Ann. I now have a proclamation. Whereas the history of the Holocaust offers an opportunity to reflect on the moral responsibilities of individuals, societies, and governments. And whereas we, the people of the city of Rapid City, should always remember the terrible events of the Holocaust and remain vigilant against hatred, persecution, and tyranny. And whereas the days of remembrance have been set aside for the people of the city of Rapid City and our nation to remember the victims of the Holocaust, as well as to reflect on the need for respect of all peoples. Now therefore I, Sam Quaker, Mayor of Rapid City, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim the week of Sunday, April 27 through today, May 5, as Days of Remembrance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Mayor Sam. I just have a few things I'd like to say. These days of remembrance are celebrated in Israel, starting with Yom HaShoah, HaShoah, which is the Hebrew word for Holocaust. It starts with that day and it continues on through today, which is Yom HaZikaron, which means remembrance. And this is particularly the remembrance of the fallen, those who gave their lives in the service of the state of Israel. Memorial Day in Rapid City and in the United States is a little different. We go shopping, we have barbecues, and we have picnics, And sometimes we have a parade, and sometimes people do go to the cemeteries and decorate the graves. But in Israel, it's very different. Yom HaShoah starts with the sounding of a siren. And I believe it goes on for 10 minutes. Everything stops. The cars stop in the middle of the road, and the drivers and all the passengers get out, and they stand in the road. Nothing moves. Everyone is remembering. So I'm not saying that the United States should adopt the same little traditions, but it is important to remember those who did give their lives in the service of our country. There is one more little thing I'd like to say. I heard on South Dakota Public Broadcasting that there's a book club going on, and the author of the book that they're reviewing this time is Patrick Hicks, and he is a writer in residence at Augustana. And they talked about this book called The Commandant of Lubitschek. Lubitschek is, it's fictional. This is a novel, but it's a historical novel. It's based on a lot of research and a lot of history. And I did page through it a little bit. It's very dark. It's a dark passage through this book. Lubitschek was supposedly a death camp where people were taken off the trains and immediately herded into gas chambers. And it's horrendous. However, I did buy 2 copies of the book, one for myself and one for Mayor Sam Quaker. Thank you very much, Mayor Sam, for what you're doing.
And again, I want to thank Ann Stanton from the local synagogue for her words tonight, and this proclamation is for you. Thank you. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to a hero of our community, Paul Priest. He also happens to be the children's crossing guard over at Wilson Elementary School, and someone that I admire greatly. And he's a veteran of World War II, and if any of you have seen the well-known movie of Remagen, he's one of the gentlemen that crossed that bridge. So I'd like to turn the microphone over to Paul Priest.
Thank you. One of the camps that I stopped at was just one, and they called that, and I think it's Neverville. It's near Strasbourg, and they were really, you realize it or not, there was 54,000 of these camps in Germany and France during the war. And I got the proclamation or slips on it and everything that I just got here just a while ago to prove that, and it was from a New York newspaper. So that's one of the things I was at. Just to tell you, though, these camps, people here do not realize what it was like. When you got within 4 to 5 miles of that camp, I could, and most of the fellows could, you could feel death. And when I got to that camp, they had the citizens there from the little town saying that they did not know what happened there, but they had them out there digging graves to put these bodies in. Now that's one of the things about it. When I go out and talk to groups and talk to organizations, I do not talk about this. I really don't. I don't like to do it. because it is, and I've got pictures of it and things like that too. That's why I just opened this up to show one right here where they was on the trains, where they loaded all the bodies on the trains. And I got those pictures. I got pictures of the ovens what they burn them in, things like that. But that's about it on that, and I don't want to talk anything about that. It's just too much. What I'm here for today, though, mostly, it came about writing this book. Colonel Larson was a guest writer of it. He wrote the book, but I had my trip, I want to thank the people of Rapid City for putting up the money and donating the money to send the wife and I back to Germany for 2 weeks to go over the road that I'd gone to when I was in the war. This book came about that. Many other things has came about it now since then. They're talking about a movie of it. I'm going back to Germany in June again for the public broadcasting system too. So I just want to present this book to Mr. Sam. There you are. You read it and enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. I want to thank you for your patience through that. And I also want to apologize for not announcing before the video was shown live on the Access channel that for some viewers it might be offensive. We are going to make sure that we have a message up on the online version and as it's replaying on the Access channel. I know my children are learning about the Holocaust in middle school, but again, it was probably too graphic for some of our younger viewers. But thank you very much for your patience, and thank you very much for joining us in this important commemoration. We have a full house tonight, and before we proceed with our executive session and come out with for general public comment, there are several chairs open in the front. There's 4 chairs open in the front. There's a chair open over on the side. And if everyone, if you have spaces in the middle, if you could move to the middle to allow people who need a spot to sit to be able to sit down. We'll now proceed with an executive session to consult legal counsel about 2 items. The first is Meitinger versus Rapid City, a pending lawsuit, and also agenda item number 41. And agenda item number 41 is a request of Dr. Andrew Severson for interpretation of a 1993 agreement with the city. Do we have a motion to go into executive session? Motion by Doyle and second by Amanda Scott. We also may be discussing item number, thank you Amanda, we may be discussing item number 19, which is regarding denial of the oversize agreement with Yasmin Dream LLC for Elderberry Boulevard in Orchard Meadows subdivision. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. We are in executive session. Thank you. We'll call the meeting to order. We have a motion to come out of executive session. We have a motion by Doyle and a second by Scott. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Joel, can you confirm we do not have any action or any motion necessary?
Not right now. I mean, obviously, some of the items we discussed are on the agenda, and action may happen later in the meeting.
Okay, very good. We'll move on to general public comment. I have one general public comment item, and this is from Dr. Rebecca Lees. Dr. Lees? This is a general public comment item. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Good evening.
I have my thing here to watch my time. Thank you, and good evening. Well, I didn't expect this large of a crowd tonight, so I'll make this very brief. But I guess I'm here to continue the theme of not remaining silent about things that are disturbing to one's ethics and values. And I am here to speak to, and not to grind into the ground, but just to speak to the article that was in the Rapid City Journal a week ago Friday on April 25th about the energy conference and the comments that were made by Mr. Ben Snow about regarding to women. Now, I understand from people since then that he didn't intend to make those, and I value that and so on. But I still have to make the comment because in my professional career, we had a lot of training in different matters pertaining to anything from gender equity to sexual harassment and so on. And any time that women are referred to and a group of men laughs at a professional conference in reference to the idea that women here at Rapid would be available for the lonely men at the man camps in Williston, I found that to just be very unsettling, and just that idea itself, and then the fact that the men all laughed, as was reported in the paper, and they laughed about it. I just have to speak to that because many of us have fought our whole lives for equality in the workplace and suffered many difficulties, and I hope that women in the future, our young daughters and our gals, are going to have more and more opportunities. Things have changed in the last 30 or 40 years, but we're still, I thought when I would be this old that we'd be way further ahead than we are now. And national studies show that women still are paid less than men for the same job. And we still have all these terrible problems with sex trafficking and rape and all those kinds of things that we read about in the paper all the time. So I will conclude by just saying that I felt I had to speak up for women. I know many women I know were very upset in reading that. And again, I appreciate it if the intent was innocent and so on, but it just needs to be said in a public forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lees. We do not have any additional general public comment items. Have I missed anyone on general public comment? Okay. Public comment is now closed. We will proceed with public comment for items 4 through 37. Public comment is now open. I have one speaker request form for items 4 through 37, and this is from Kyle Treeler from Dream Design on item 19. Item 19 is regarding the oversize agreement for Elderberry Boulevard in Orchard Meadows subdivision. So we'll recognize Kyle at this time. Good evening, Kyle.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity. I do first want to start off and thank the city and the city council for showing that video. It's very important to remember, and I was surprised. I wasn't expecting that, and thank you very much. I did have a presentation. I don't know if you can pull that up or not. Basically, I'd like to kind of go over and hit the high points of the Elderberry oversized request. This has been an ongoing issue that we've been working with city staff and city council with. It began January 8th of this year when we submitted on behalf of Yasmin Dream, the owners of Orchard Meadows, an application for oversized reimbursement for the construction of 2 additional lanes of a 5-lane highway for the Orchard Meadows subdivision. We did that in accordance with the city ordinance and with our experience in other similar projects. And we based that on this particular statute that states the developer shall not be required to pay the full cost of any highway or arterial street, but shall participate in the cost of these improvements in the amount of that collector street. The oversized request went before the city council about 4 weeks ago. From then, we were given a direction to work with city staff and prepare a final oversized agreement, which we've done. The final oversized agreement, we came to a total amount of $115,000. And it was for the area specifically highlighted in pink there. Only the 2 lanes on Elderberry Boulevard. We did not include anything for the turning lane or additional improvements for stormwater or water or sewer, which we could have been entitled to under the ordinance. Elderberry Boulevard is the main access into the Orchard Meadows development, but it also serves other tracks. First, there's the Lytle Estate, which is the sole means of ingress and egress to. There's also over a 20-acre parcel of land owned by the city of Rapid City that's been dedicated for use as a park. We're also providing safer access to the adjoining subdivision where we have over 80 lots with only one access out onto the highway. This is the master plan of the Orchard Meadows subdivision. In it, you can see we have much more than just commercial properties. We do have on the northern third several commercial tracts, but then as you progress to the south, we have over 140 single-family lots, a large tract for multifamily, and then a large area dedicated as open space and parkland. Now, after nearly 3 months, we received an answer to our oversized request. The answer came back as the staff supported denying it based on 2 reasons. One, that it's classified as a commercial street, and that 2, that the traffic was created solely from this development. If you see the commercial street definition, it is solely for a commercial development area, which you could see from the master plan was much more than that. We also wanted to point out that the terminology used in the ordinance is arterial or highway. Given that there's no clear definition of highway in the Rapid City ordinances, we turned to our legal counsel. They provided us one that we feel meets what we're applying for. Now, we worked with the city staff. We came back, we got a 3rd letter in which the timing of our plat came back as the main issue for denial. We also feel that that request is untimely. Thank you.
Thank you. We do not have any further speaker request forms for items 4 through 37. Have I missed anyone? Seeing none, public comment is now closed. We're on consent items 4 through 37. If any council members would like to remove any of these items for separate consideration, please do so now. We'll first go to our city engineer, Dale Tech.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to remove item number 21, please.
Item 21, Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to remove item number 33 so I can abstain, please.
Item 21 and 33. Anything else? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve items 4 through 37 as listed per the recommendations listed in the agenda, with the exceptions of 21 and 33. Any further discussion? Seeing none? Yes? Motion maker was Chad Lewis, and the seconder was Steve Laurenti. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are now on item number 21. And we'll go to our Public Works Chairman, Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 21 is to acknowledge Lazy P 6 Land Company Incorporated requests for city commitment to design build remaining 30% plus or minus of MP 203, and I move to acknowledge.
We have a motion by Nordstrom to acknowledge and a second by Laurenti, and we'll go to our city engineer, Dale Tech.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to provide a clarification of this item. At the Public Works Committee meeting last Tuesday, it was reported that the drainage improvements, which Terry Wolterstorff identified for this project, would be funded through the new stormwater drainage utility, and that 5-year plan or the funding for this particular project would go through the CIP committee. Actually, that funding, the 5-year plan for the stormwater drainage utility, will actually come through the Public Works Committee. I just wanted to make that clarification.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're now on item number 33. And Richie, if you could read this into the record for us, item 33.
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor. Item 33 is to award a total bid of for ready mixed concrete opened on April 29th, 2014 to the lowest responsible bidder, and that is Pete Lean and Sons Incorporated, in the amount of $77,725, and I move to approve the award.
Motion by Nordstrom and a second by Bonnie Peterson, and we'll have an abstention from Amanda Scott. Any discussion on item 33? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries with one abstention from Alderwoman Amanda Scott. We are now on non-consent items 38 through 43. Public comment is now open, and we'll proceed with, we have 3 public comments on item number 39, which is first reading of an ordinance to allow pet stores as a conditional use in the Central Business District. And we'll first go to Jackie Lake on item 39. Just to remind everyone, the time per speaker is 3 minutes. And go ahead, Jackie.
My name is Jackie Lake. Why us? Why now? The first part of March, Barb got a telephone call from the Humane Society of the Black Hills. The lady flatly stated to Barb that she had an illegal business and she could no longer sell birds from the Mount Rushmore Birds and Paws Pet Bakery. She quoted an antiquated and unknown law of 1935 city ordinance. What is the motive? What is the agenda of this person who seems to represent the interests of the local Humane Society? I want to address the fact that the Humane Society has partnered with Barb and former owner of the Paws Pet Bakery in the adoption of their dogs and cats several times over the last years when we had special photo event sessions. These included photos with Santa, Easter photos. I feel it's important to mention that Pet Antics, who partnered with Barb and several other Rapid City businesses, had in a 10-year period donated close to $18,000 to the Humane Society. One event was unique. In particular, Lola, Barb's dog, had puppies. She held a puppy shower. The gifts that were given was a van load of food and supplies for the animals of the Humane Society. On the issue of boarding birds and receiving injured and homeless birds, the Humane Society cannot care for these birds. I have personally cared for 2 cockatiels that have been surrendered to the shelter. They in turn called Barb to take over their care. In her store, all the birds that are boarded are now kept out of public view, out of the flow of traffic. Injured birds are kept in separate areas and always have been given professional care. Homeless birds have been given a second chance and have found forever homes. One case had a personal connection. A doctor I had worked with many years ago had passed away. He had 2 larger birds who were very bonded. Barb found a forever home for them. They were older and hard to place, but Barb found a way. In my situation, I am a dog and cat person. I do not particularly even like birds. With Barb's careful oversight, she taught me to care for birds, enjoy them, and my life has been enriched by the companionship. My husband and I are now the home of the old and dying hospice house for birds. Humane Society does not have the facilities, the staff, the training, or the space to board, home, or care for these birds. Where are you going to go to find any place to do what she does on a daily basis? Where can you safely board any birds? In conclusion, Barbie has given notice that she wants to be involved in the language of a new updated ordinance. She agrees that Rapid City does not need a pet store in the town core, as these stores are commonly supplied by puppy and kitten mills. Mount Rushmore Birds is not a pet store. It is a bird specialty store. The ordinance does not apply. In all of the information that has been shared by letters to the editors, 2 cents, has anyone ever looked at Barb's store as a pet store? I don't think so. It's always been a pet specialty, a bird specialty store.
Thank you. And we'll go to Betty Backus, also on item 39. Betty.
My name is Betty Backus. Mr. Mayor, members of the council. In early March, it was determined that city ordinances do not allow pet stores in the central business district. It is well known that through the years there have been downtown stores who were selling pets. Prior to purchasing Paws Pet Bakery and Gifts at 607 St. Joe, an inquiry was made of city planning to see if Mount Rushmore Birds would be allowed to move into that location. Barb and Patrick Parr were told they could move their bird specialty business into that storefront. They sell companion birds. They do not sell other pets. Barb and Patrick are certified avian specialists with a loyal customer following from a 5-state area. They are honest people, active participants with Destination Rapid City and other downtown events. Bird rescue is an important part of Mount Rushmore Birds' operation. When the Humane Society takes in birds, Barb is their go-to person because their staff is not qualified to care for birds. Barb rehabilitates these rescued birds, eventually placing them in loving homes. Barb has given free avian presentations at the city library, local schools, nursing homes, and hospice house. She has been a driving force in producing the annual Birds and Blooms free educational event held at Jolly Lane Greenhouse. Barb organized the public showing of the film The Parrots of Telegraph Hill at the Elks Theater. She has freely shared her avian expertise with the National American University Vet Tech program. Barb is passionate about what she does. Her primary objective is to promote responsible pet ownership. It is ironic that these very public events have taken place during the past 7 years from 3 different central business district locations. A kennel license was applied for in each of those years, with Barb and Mount Rushmore Birds only coming to the attention of city planning in 2014. This ordinance has been written intending that after passage, Mount Rushmore Birds will then apply for a conditional use permit. I propose that this permit should not be required. The fair and reasonable thing to do is to grandfather Mount Rushmore Birds, allowing them to continue operating their long-established business in the Central Business District as they have since 2007. The new ordinance should apply to businesses that are opened in the future. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Betty. And we'll now go to Sherry Bradstream, also on item 39. Good evening, Sherry.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity this evening to express my heartfelt concern as an active consumer in the Business Core District. And not only is this a business core district, it's a neighborhood. It's a neighborhood of people that care about one another. Well, this core neighborhood is rich in services and culturally diverse community members. Because of this richness, the City of Rapid City must focus on serving the needs of all contributing consumers. I need and use, and I know others need and use, several times a week, a bird specialty shop, bakery, gift store. Therefore, I must ask this potent question, and believe me, it's a potent question. How can this specialty shop be considered illegal, especially since it has contributed since May 25th, 2007 to the core business district? Why is this shop now being told it must have a conditional use permit? A little over 2 days ago, a core business 4 doors east of this specialty shop allowed a boxing match sanctioned by that core business, which escalated and continued on into the alley. Does this business allowing violence to happen in its facility and in the core business district require a conditional use permit as well? Thank you for the opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you. We are now on speaker request forms for item number 40, and we'll first go to Dale Barcher. And while Dale is coming up, item number 40 is the ordinance for some amendments to the adult-oriented business code. Dale Barcher. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. I am Dale Barcher. I am a 30-year Rapid City resident of Ward 2 and the Executive Director of the Family Heritage Alliance. I want to begin tonight by thanking you for your service to the community and your willingness to listen to her citizen. I am here tonight to encourage you to vote yes and take the lead once again and to approve the first reading of the amendments proposed to our current Rapid City adult-oriented business ordinance here in Rapid City. You are used to taking the lead, City Council members. Many of you heard that this morning the Supreme Court handed down its decision in the Town of Greece versus Galloway case. The court upheld the constitutionality of governmental prayer and affirmed the long-held right of Americans to pray in the public square. I want to thank you, City Council members, for taking the lead several months ago when you unanimously supported prayer in the public square here. And it's gratifying to see the Supreme Court follow your lead. So congratulations. Well, we're here tonight asking you to, encouraging you to take the AOB ordinance and to adopt the three amendments that are before you tonight. Adopting amendments to our AOB ordinance is not something new or unheard of. In fact, our AOB ordinance was established early in 2003 when the citizens of Rapid City said yes to such an ordinance. It was then amended, strengthened through the amending process January the 28th of 2004, again on April the 14th of 2004, again June 16th of 2004, and lastly, March 27th of 2013. Each time this ordinance has been amended by this city council, our community became a safer place to raise our children and our families. So we are asking you once again tonight to strengthen our ordinance, our Rapid City AOB ordinance, on its first reading and make tonight an amendment for May 5, 2014. It can be done. It should be done. Many in the room here tonight believe it must be done. Why? Because these amendments placed before you are carefully measured. They approach this issue with a business common sense, which will, in fact, assist our local law enforcement personnel in the doing of their job and add clarity to the legal aspect of regulating our local AOBs. Our city attorney's office has done an admirable job in both defining these amendments and laying out the reasoning for these amendments, and that can be found attached to tonight's agenda when one goes online. Our Rapid City AOB ordinance from start to finish is a scathing rebuke of the adult-oriented business. The need for its regulation is unquestionable. I'd like to read the very first whereas found in our AOB ordinance in order to make this point. Quote, whereas adult-oriented businesses require special supervision from the public safety agencies of Rapid City in order to protect and preserve the health, safety, morals, and welfare of the patrons of such businesses as well as the citizens of Rapid City. And that list goes on and on. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we respectfully ask for your yes vote tonight on the first reading of this. Let's make it crystal clear. Let's give this message to our community and beyond, that adult-oriented businesses, although permitted by law, will be watched like a hawk as we protect our children and our citizens. Thank you for your time.
We'll now recognize Jill Mills on item number 40. Jill.
My name is Jill Mills, and I live in Rapid City. I am in support of the proposed amendments to ordinance number 5993. Adult-oriented businesses are detrimental to women and to families, and our community will only be healthy and strong if our families are healthy and strong. I personally would like to see AOBs banned from our community altogether, but short of that, we need to have as strong of regulations on AOBs as possible and be able to enforce these regulations easily. please vote in favor of the proposed amendments to Ordinance 5993. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to James Leon on item number 40. Good evening.
Good evening, Council. Clearly, I'm in direct opposition to most of the people here. I live at 145 Adonia Lane here in Rapid City, and I'm here to urge the Council to reconsider the proposed changes to Ordinance 5993. The first change that I would urge the Council to reconsider is extending the visibility requirement to adult cabarets. While this new requirement is supposedly meant to create accountability for the licensee and help deter future ordinance violations, I see this as a clear attempt to reduce the viability of this type of adult-oriented business. Secondly, I would urge the Council to reconsider the changes made to Section 570040. While most of the processes outlined in this section do not appear to have changed drastically, some of the new language is too vague and gives the city too much discretion. One example would be subsection B, subsection 7, which allows the denial of a license if, quote, the applicant's general character and fitness disqualifies the applicant for a license, end quote. This provision is broad and overreaching, considering that there are already provisions in the greater section that cover past convictions, due fees and taxes, and past license revocations. Lastly, subsection E of issuance of a license has been rewritten to now require the licensee of an AOB to renew biannually instead of annually. This appears to me to achieve nothing more than to double the cost of licensing. Again, this will only further reduce the ability of AOB owners to run their businesses effectively. So to conclude, the changes proposed only affirm what I and many like-minded libertarians I've spoken with believe is a witch hunt aimed at Shotgun Willies. Now, before any swift judgments are made about why I've taken this position on the matter, let me make something clear. I am not a patron of Shotgun Willies, and I have no vested interest in any AOBs. It was only after I read about the number of citations issued by the RCPD at Shotgun Willies that I was compelled to research the ordinance and the newly proposed changes. After reading these changes, I've decided to come here tonight as a neutral party to remind the Council that their job is not to pick winners and losers in our business community or to squeeze out legitimate businesses they don't particularly like. Certainly, members of the Council and citizens of Rapid City are afforded the liberty to avoid Shotgun Willies if they don't approve of the activities within. But as businesses, AOBs should be afforded similar liberty to operate in a manner which is not harming others or infringing on other people's rights. The proposed changes are not progressively seeking to grant AOBs that liberty. Again, I would urge the Council to vote no on the proposed changes to Ordinance number 5993 or strike these changes, vote no, sorry. I would further ask that the Council consider changing the language as it pertains to specified sexual activities and to consider changing some of the provisions in Section 570160 to help prevent future violations and keep Shotgun Willies viable. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ed Randazzo, also on item number 40. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Quaker and members of the City Council. I'm Ed Randazzo. I am a resident of Ward 2, and Pastor Dale Barcher is a tough act to follow. But I would like to add my voice to the many who have encouraged you to approve the revisions to Ordinance 5993. These revisions are appropriate and necessary to stand firm on the Judeo-Christian values which have inspired and sustained our republic. They will also help make it easier for our public safety personnel to make appropriate judgments and ultimately to make your decisions easier in the event of challenges of violations of the ordinance. Despite the shrill voices of some who hide behind claims of rights to do virtually anything, these revisions are a positive step to counter the seemingly relentless slide of morality. To deny their changes would empower those who prey on the morally depraved and contribute to the denigration of women. I ask for your unanimous approval.
Thank you. We'll now go to Larry Paulson, also on item 40. Good evening, Larry.
Good evening. My name is Larry Paulson. I pastor Word of Truth Family Church. For the last 6 years, we've been located within the Club for Boys. We rent the facilities on Sunday. It's a great blessing to our church. And I'm going to do something today that may seem like a miracle. I'm going to speak on something, and being a pastor, I'm going to take less than 3 minutes to do it. So for those of you that think the days of miracles are over, you're fixing to see one. But I really can't add a whole lot to some of the things that I said, but I just want to, from a pastor's heart, and I have many people from my church here tonight to support this too, that I too ask you to unanimously agree to this first reading, this ordinance. I'm not here to debate the right and wrong of that adult business, although that's not a debate that I would run from. But I do support and stand with many other pastors in this community to say that it's a pretty obvious right and wrong decision. And as much as we can do to help keep our city clean and our city moral, we don't need necessarily moral police, but there is a definition of right and wrong. And everything that we can do to help this city, we need to do it. And I love Rapid City. I love the people here. I love my church. And it's not against something, it's for something. And it's for the people. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We will now recognize Aaron Johnson on item number 40, also on item 40. Mr. Johnson. Good evening.
Good evening. My name's Aaron Johnson. I'm the owner of Shotgun Willie's. There's been a lot of comment here tonight on the negative impact that Rapid City has. In 2009, the Journal did a follow-up story on the AOB ordinance when it was first put in place. And it's still on there if you guys go on there, and I encourage everybody to read that. In that ordinance, it tells you what happened, why it happened, and how their approach was that the city council people did. And I understand about having a safe environment. I too have been in Rapid City for 30-some plus years. Raised 3 daughters by myself in town here, and it's home. Rapid City is home to me. Like I said, there was a lot of powerful things that were said tonight. There's somebody that spoke out on behalf of Shotgun Willie's. Don't know who that guy is, but wow. But there's a line or two that I want to read out of that letter that the Journal had read. It said, years of statistics don't lie. There's a problem in Rapid City, and regulating adult-run businesses wasn't the fix. In a Journal story looking at the recent release of Federal Bureau of Investigation's Uniform Crime Report, Rapid City Police Chief Steve Allender addressed the increasing violent crimes in the state, including rapes and other violent crimes in Rapid City. Crime itself is a symptom of some condition in the community, he said. In each of these categories, robberies, aggravated assault, and rapes, we have a unique set of circumstances that lead to these crimes occurring. It appears adult-oriented businesses were not one of the conditions leading to them crimes. In saying that, I believe that there is probably a need to keep the places safe in Rapid City. You shut down all these types of businesses, you're going to have all these types of other people out and about looking for their enjoyment elsewhere. God forbid it's in a school zone, something like that, to that nature. I would much rather know where they're at than not know where they're at. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Greg Blanc, also on item number 40.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, point of order. We're not supposed to allow clapping for all this, if that's okay. Thank you.
Good evening.
Thankful for the opportunity to be before you again. I respect and appreciate your leadership and your friendship. I have a few things I'd like to say. My name is Greg Blanc. I'm the pastor at Calvary Chapel Community Church, 320 St. Patrick Street. I am also a member of the South Dakota West River Human Trafficking Task Force. In addition, I have been the Rapid City Ministerial Alliance president for the last 4 years. I am in support of the amendments to Ordinance 5993, and I encourage you, like Ed did, to unanimously vote to accept them. Even though the courts have interpreted the First Amendment to allow adult-oriented businesses to legally operate, it is impossible to imagine the founders of our nation would have ever conceived that these establishments would one day be justified under the banner of free speech. Being legal in our city does not mean it's good for our city. And as our elected community leaders, I encourage you to choose what is good for our city. After reviewing and blushing my way through the 18-page document on the city's website, immediately felt like I needed to take a shower, for one, and was even more resolute that there is no moral benefit to these establishments and many negative consequences. Numerous undesirable activities and harmful secondary effects have been well documented for decades. The minimal amount of tax income generated by these businesses to the city is not worth the trade-off of the exploitation of women, the fleecing of men, loss of property value, safety concerns, increased crime, and additional law enforcement expenses. It is extremely reasonable to update the existing ordinance with restrictions that clarify the three primary additions to the ordinance: to remove unobservable private room obstructions, to define the word knowledge so as to make the operators responsible and accountable for the behavior of their employees, and to provide a fair appeals process for the owners. In doing so, this protects the city and the owner by removing any of the vague verbiage from the previous ordinance. So again, I strongly encourage you to approve the recommendations of the city attorney and unanimously adopt the recommended changes to Ordinance 5993. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to Representative Scott Craig. State Representative Scott Craig. Also on item 40. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Great to be with you tonight. My name is Scott Craig, senior pastor of Bighorn Canyon Community Church here in Rapid City, also a member of the South Dakota State House of Representatives from District 33. I'm also a member of the South Dakota West River Human Trafficking Task Force and am the public policy advisor for KLMP and KSLT Radio. Not to be redundant or to repeat what you have already heard, I simply commend the proposed revisions to Ordinance 5993, and I would even ask you to reconsider the term adult-oriented business. Adult is a circumlocution for sexually explicit, and perhaps that we would remove some of the insult to the term adult. I remember being a kid and hearing about adult entertainment. That began to kind of skew my understanding of what an adult was. So I simply want you to continue in the direction you've been going. Vote unanimously for these revisions. And I thank you again for your work for this wonderful city that we call home. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We will now go to Brad Clausen, also on item number 40. And this is the second to the last speaker request form on item 40.
My name is Pastor Brad Clausen. I run a small ministry called Woven Cord Ministries. I mentor boys and men from the ages of 7 to 57. Ladies, that's because men never really grow up. You know, and so early in my ministry here, I walked across a front yard along the edge of the house, across broken beer bottles and empty condom packs to pick up a 5th grader and his sister to take him out for a root beer float. I did that a lot back in those days, less so now. It's hard to understand some of the conditions that people grow up in. You know, and I will hope, and I'm asking that you would unanimously support these new conditions. Not because I want to see all AOBs shut down. What I want to see is no need for an AOB, that our hearts are different, that there's good in them, that we recognize good. It's funny, these days, good is often called evil and evil is often called good. And it's hard to live in a society and a culture that gets its polarities mixed up. The Holocaust movie touched me because I remember a time when I was in college and I'd been home in Colton, South Dakota, and I went up to the swimming pool to take a swim in the afternoon before I went away to work for that summer. And I passed a couple of boys that were fighting. They were in elementary school, and there were a bunch of older boys egging them on and laughing at them because they were both crying and throwing their fists. And I walked right by. I didn't say a thing. I don't dodge fights very often anymore because my heart's changed. I get in a lot of messy and sticky situations in our city. I've been doing this for about 14 years. It's a sad place when our hearts are broken. It's a sad place when lives are twisted. It's a sad place when things don't go right in a family. And young boys grow up to look at women as objects to satisfy their lust. I know that because I have my own issues in my own histories and my own sins that I have to deal with to conquer in the power of my trust and love for Jesus, who's transformed my heart and changed some aspects of my lives and the way I look at things. I don't walk away from fights because I know how important it is to stand for something, to take a stand sometime and say it's wrong. You can't do that. What degrades one of us degrades us all. It doesn't take much. I don't know, do you remember the movie It's a Wonderful Life? And when George ceases to exist and Potter takes over the city and it becomes a whole different place, the disappearance of one man changed the whole community. Well, we're not just one man or one woman. We all have a vote. We all have a way to keep this place as clean and healthy and wholesome as possible. We put that trust in you to make those decisions for us. And I'm asking you to do what is right, not just for us righteous people who think we got it all together, but for all of us. I have a daughter and 3 sons. I want them safe. I have lots of young men and young women that I work with in the context of my ministry, and I want them safe. And I don't want those guys wandering the streets. I want their hearts changed so that they don't have to wander the streets looking for their kicks. But that's my job. I see I'm over time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll now go to Payu Harris. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good to see you again. My name is Payu Harris. This is going to be brief. The flag right there, and our forefathers formed this great nation based on life and liberty and freedom. That means as Americans, we have the right to engage in businesses that are legal. Now, whether you're for AOBs or against them, the law states as long as they are within the law, they are legal. We live in a democracy, not a theocracy. And when we allow religion to interfere with independent government, we become no better than the Taliban that we fight against. I have friends and I have family overseas in harm's way right now, defending and dying to protect the freedom for the owner of Shotgun Willie's, the Bell Star, and any other AOB to do their business, conduct their business with the freedom within the law. Again, this country is founded on democracy, not theocracy. That's something I just wish, I hope, I pray you remember and take into account. I appreciate Dale Barcher's opinions. I appreciate the other side's opinions. But the fact of the matter is, again, democracy, democracy, democracy. This country is founded on freedom and liberty for all, regardless of whether we like the idea or not. So, maybe just something to think about. God bless our troops. God bless Rapid City. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What we're going to do now is we have, in consulting with our City Council Vice President Amanda Scott, we have, in counting the speaker request forms on item 43, we have 14 of them. So what we're going to do with the indulgence of the council is we're going to hear the speaker request form on item 41 from Jeff Collins, and then after that we're going to close public comment. We're going to get through items 38 through 42, and then we will take all 14 speaker request forms when we get to item 43. So it'll help the meeting flow a little bit better, I think. So we'll go to Jeff Collins on item number 41.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council. I'm not going to be very long. I've submitted our position paper on this legal issue that we are presenting to the city regarding an interpretation of an agreement between Dr. Andrew Severson, my client, and the city from 1993 involving the development of Park Drive. Dr. Severson's position has been made clear through our submissions that once he begins developing his property, which is to the benefit of both the city and himself, that he can only be assessed for improvements to Park Drive or the placement of Park Drive on track 2 of his property, not track 4. We believe that's the plain reading of the contract that was drafted by the city. Any ambiguity in the contract would be interpreted against the city. In exchange for that, Dr. Severson will execute any and all documents that should have been executed in 1993 but weren't, and bring this to a resolution. Dr. Severson is very strong-minded in his position, believes he is in the right here, and that he will do what's necessary to reach that resolution. We just as soon not do that, get the property developed, benefit both Rapid City and Dr. Severson, and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We do not have any further speaker request forms on items 38 through 42. Have I missed anyone on 38 through 42? Promise we will come back to the 14 speaker request forms on item 43 momentarily. Public comment is now closed. We will proceed with item number 38, and we'll go to Chad Lewis, our Legal and Finance Chairman, to read item 38. Chad.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item number 38 is the first reading of ordinance 5989, an ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, rezoning the within described property as requested by Sean Brinkman for rezoning from medium density residential district general commercial to general commercial district for property generally described as being located at 607 East Madison Street, and I move approval.
Motion by Lewis, second by Nordstrom. Any discussion? We'll go to Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question for Community Planning and Development, if I may.
Go ahead.
What kind of, would there be any ramifications for waiving the CUP for this? Wait a minute. I am off one, aren't I? Oh, okay, never mind. I numbered them wrong. I'll yield.
Any further discussion on item number 38? This is regarding the first reading of the rezoning on the 600 block of East Madison Street. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. 39, Alderman Lewis.
This is you, Charity. Item number 39, first reading of ordinance 5991, an ordinance to allow pet stores as a conditional use in the central business district by amending section 17.16.030 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. I move approval.
We have a motion to approve by Lewis and a second by Amanda Scott, and we'll go to Alderman Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is what happens after having evening time meetings after a long day. Mr. Limbaugh, if I may. No. Would there be any ramifications for allowing that, allowing them not to go through the CUP process?
Yeah, as it is right now, the pet stores are not allowed in the downtown district, so the only way that we can get through this is to create the ability for them to get a conditional use, which is what's before you tonight. If the council passes that, we'll work immediately with the store owner to bring a conditional use permit to the Planning Commission and their decision would be final unless it's appealed.
Well, I understand what's before us. However, considering that the city allowed this and didn't catch it, and we basically said, you're okay to do this, why would we not make some sort of concession?
I would contend that we didn't say that. Now, it was brought to our attention by the Humane Society that there was a store operating within the downtown district, and that's why we're amending the ordinance. I don't have the authority to waive a requirement.
Okay, so, I'm sorry, what? Yes, we do. Okay. I'll yield right now. Thank you.
Alderwoman Bonnie Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor. I would make a substitute motion that we, might be contradicting myself here, but that we approve this, but we waive the fees for them to follow it. If I get a second, I will. Okay. I thank you. My reason for this is it is ridiculous. It's been downtown for 7 years, and if the city can't do their business and get things straightened out in 7 years, people shouldn't have to pay for it. I mean, it's different if it was a business on the outskirts of town where people maybe didn't know it existed or something. But, and I know it probably sets precedents and things like that that we like to avoid, but I just think it's hasn't been handled in the best way that it could have been. So I will yield the floor for wiser people to speak. Thank you.
We'll go to our city attorney, Joel Landine.
Well, I was going to address two things. I believe Alderman Doyle's question is why make this a conditional use rather than a use as a matter of right? And I think the answer to that is that it's a pet shop, which could be birds, it could be dogs. If somebody proposed to put a kennel downtown, I think we would want to look at it a little more closely. I'm sure birds are kind of one thing, but other pet stores, it just may be something that we at least want to take a look at. In defense of, I guess, city staff, I would just point out that the Humane Society actually keeps the list and goes through and provides a list of the kennels to the city, and the Humane Society is not a city entity. They certainly receive funding from us, and we have agreements with them, and we never received the list with this business, was never listed as a kennel on the list that we received annually of the kennels. And there was a change in some staffing at the Humane Society, and the new officer responsible for doing that, putting together the list, had the name of this business on there, and when it was received by the city, at that point is when they realized, oh, this had not been approved previously, but it had never appeared on any of the previous lists we received. When we found out, nobody tried to say we were going to shut the business down. We just contacted the owner, let her know the issue, and began to work through how we were going to rectify this. So I think that some of the impressions and the beating that frankly staff has been somewhat unfair. I understand why the council would want to waive the fees. That probably is appropriate. But again, that's a decision that you guys need to make. It's not necessarily a decision staff can make itself. So I just think that that gives a little fuller picture of how we ended up where we're at.
Joel, before we proceed to the additional lights, is the waiver of the fees appropriate within this motion, or would that have to be separate? Help clarify that.
It's really a separate issue, but I mean, if council wants to waive the fees, we can take that into consideration and use that. As long as you authorize that, then we can incorporate it. I mean, really right now we're not talking about the specific business, we're just amending the ordinance. It really technically isn't about this business, even though we all know that the reason this ordinance is coming forward is because of the issues raised by this business.
So this motion is proper? And you're okay?
I'm fine with the motion.
Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. That was the only thing that I was going to double check on was the order in which we're trying to pass this, because I do support waiving the fees on this one business going forward, but I see that as a separate issue. Tonight, this is just a first reading, which means this still has to go through a second reading.
So, Joel, if you're comfortable with it, it just seems to me that we could either add another item to go ahead and pass the no fees tonight, or actually, because it just seems to me that it doesn't fall in line to pass the first reading and then tag on an exception, but...
Procedurally, I think you're absolutely correct. But at the same time, I would hate to see an article in the paper tomorrow that I was opposed to this store because I stood in the way of a motion rather than allow it to proceed tonight. So if
But
you
would-
want to, I would agree procedurally, it would be better to bring it forward as a separate item when the actual request from the business came forward. But at the same time, we're spending a lot of time talking about procedure when it seems like pretty clear the direction everyone wants to go.
Thank you. Would it be appropriate to split this so that we pass the first reading and then also stipulate that the conditional use fee be exempt on this property?
Yeah, that's fine.
Is that your request to do a division of the question?
Yes,
Okay.
Mayor, that would be.
We have a request to do a division of the question. If there's no objection, we'll declare it divided. Everyone understands that we're now handling this as two motions. We're going to handle first reading of the ordinance first. So now let's debate that only. Any further discussion? Amanda, you still have the floor.
Sorry, Mayor, I yield the floor at this point.
Bonnie, any further discussion? We'll go to Alderwoman Bonnie Peterson.
I just wanted to make clear that I would not be beating up our staff. I think we're very impressed with our staff. It's just that sometimes things just aren't perfect. And so that was my comment. So I don't want anyone thinking that our staff is not, they're nearly as perfect as people can be. And you know, none of us are 100% perfect. But we have excellent staff here at the city.
Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. I wasn't going to comment on this either, but I just wanted to thank the city attorney for bringing forward the comment about what was happening with our city staff, which I thought was, I was very dismayed about the comments that were made towards our staff. So thank you to the city attorney for making this very clear that is for the position that he brought forward, because I'm just really dismayed at the conduct of the people that were attacking our city staff was, I felt, very inappropriate. Thank you.
Brad Estes. Alderman Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to support this. You know, I'm sure if we look through, we've got other, you know, things that have fallen through the cracks and ordinances, and I commend the staff. I think I've not heard of anything other than the staff doing anything and everything they can to right this wrong. I just think that, you know, any publicity is good publicity, and it just seems that the more these people kind of keep their feathers ruffled, no pun intended, the more they get front page. I mean, and I commend the staff. I mean, like I say, I'm sure we'll come up against something else along the way where we found out we got some archaic some rule in the books that just needs to be fixed. And I'm going to support this. Thanks.
We'll go to Alderman Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to speak up on this either, but I do want to take Barb's side for a minute. I know that Barb does a wonderful job down there, and probably the only bird person on this council. I know how passionate these people can be. So we came a long way, Barb, and I think you're going to get your fees waived, so I'm very happy for that. Okay.
Any further discussion on the motion? The motion is to approve first reading. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. We now go to the second question, the second motion that's on the floor relating to this item, and that's to waive the fees for Rushmore birds. We have a motion by Scott and a second by Roberts. Any discussion on that item? Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Thank you, everyone. And the discussion of this foul topic has now concluded. All right, we are now on item number 40.
I'd like to welcome everybody to open mic night. Okay. Item number 40, first reading of ordinance 5993, an ordinance to require certain adult-oriented businesses to provide an unobstructed view in patron-permitted areas, to define knowledge as it pertains to licensees, and to delineate the hearing process for adverse actions against licensees in the Rapid City Municipal Code by amending chapters 5. City of Rapid City by amending chapter 5.70 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. I move approval.
We have a motion by Lewis and a second by Laurenti. And we'll go to Alderman Bonnie Peterson. Bonnie.
Thank you, Mayor. I like having an honest conversation. That's what I always talk about what's good about being on the city council, or what our role is, and that is to have an honest conversation with our citizens. And earlier today, I was making inquiries about that door because at first I thought it was a locked door, and that, of course, would be totally inappropriate, or a full door that could be locked. And so I was told it was a half door. And so you saw me kind of running around up here because I didn't get my emails answered earlier today. And because in my mind, I thought it was like a room that people, that held multiple people, and then it had this half door. So I was like trying to not cut into business, because I thought, if it's like a Mr. Ed horse, you could probably, door, you could see Mr. Ed in there and see what was going on. But that's not the case. So I don't have a problem with that, or a concern. So I'm going to support this, and I would just say some of the comments that I heard tonight. If I could write this the way I would want to write it, I would have that you would have to be at least 21. Because let's face it, those of us that have had teenagers, we know you're not an adult at 18. Most of us live very pampered lives and haven't had to fully support ourselves by that. So but anyway, it's 18 years old that you have to be. The specified sexual activity, and I think someone earlier talked about adult-oriented. It's like there's been wonderful young men go to these places. It's kind of a learning curve or something, or a rite of passage perhaps for some individuals. But obviously it's not the place that we want, it's not the most enlightening place to be. But so it's a place of sexual activity or sexual environment. So, but then we have a society where our cheerleaders on the football fields, when they dance, I would say they're specifying specific sexual activity. How many of you support football teams and the cheerleaders? And that's out in front of God and everybody. At least here we're in a little building. So, so that's a problem, or a concern about how schizophrenic our society is. And you go to buy little girl clothes, and, for a little 8-year-old or 9-year-old, well, most of the clothing is like sluts are us. I mean, that's what they're dressed like. And it's I hate to use that word, but that is like what we're teaching our young girls, is on the fast track to be sexually active. And it's a big problem in our source of freedom. And then, of course, it's embarrassing to talk about sex, even though a healthy adult will be sexually active. That's how. It's a healthy. I'm a nurse. That's why I can talk about sex, because that's something that nurses talk about with our patients. So it's a big concern. And how do you balance all of that when you're trying to be Christian or good people and all of those things? How do you find the balance? How do you find the balance of not interfering with someone's business that they've been allowed to have I would call it more like a 3/4 door, So you're kind of messing with the business, you're messing with those young women's livelihood. But after seeing it and realizing it's a tiny little room, and I know that it's not, I kind of thought it was like a living room with a half door, but it's not like that. So I don't have a problem. The other question or thing I just want to comment for food for thought in this honest conversation is that with, and Mayor, thanks for showing the Holocaust thing. And it's been, how many years? I think they said 60-something since Jack Vandergeest was released from his torture chamber. But to remind us that we still have a long way to go to stop hatred. Unusual, 200 to 300,000 people with disabilities were killed in the Holocaust. If you weren't perfect, off with you. Estimated up to 25,000 homosexual men. And they were especially treated very cruelly. 2,000 Jehovah's Witnesses. Some say, well, they probably came knocking at the door, but that's another side. But what I want to say, or my point in this, is that they say to speak out when there's hatred. And there's good people, good religious groups, bringing in guest speakers that are, at least according to the way the paper wrote it up, that are preaching hatred against certain groups of people. And I don't like that, because we have to be all for one and one for all. And it's hard to say that, and I guess I probably wouldn't have said it, except I just have 2 months left on the council. But I'm just saying, stop and think about that. What we say on this category, we're all about this, but then we're so against this. We're all against adult-oriented businesses, but we're all about the cheerleaders up there dancing sexually and supporting the sports teams. We're all about guns. We're all about supporting violence, but not about sex, which is a part of a healthy aspect of our lives. Anyway, I'm off topic, and I appreciate your indulgence, and I appreciate y'all coming and talking to us and letting us know what you think, because that's very important. That's the only way we can have a good conversation with citizens, so thank you.
Alderman Chad Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to state for the record, I do believe you have to be 21 years old to frequent this establishment, as they have a liquor license. So there's no 18-year-olds, just so people don't think that teenagers are flowing in and out of there. And also, as a father of a young daughter who's only 5, going on about 30, I can guarantee you that it's my job and her mother's job to make sure that she dresses properly. So I fight that battle daily, but she wants to wear makeup like mommy does, and we don't allow that. And so I would stress that perhaps parental guidance is pretty paramount in this world. Anyway.
We'll go to our Assistant Chief of Police, Carl Jageris, for clarification on that issue.
To be a patron of the establishment, you would need to be 21 years old due to the alcohol serving license. However, to be an employee of the establishment, you'd need to be 18, as long as you, so the dancer could be 18.
Thank you. Bill Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just trying to decide where to begin. We've heard a lot of passionate testimony tonight, and I must say, our citizens of our fair city always mean well, and we see and hear arguments on both sides of issues, and it's always based on somebody's true conviction. I said this before when we spoke about Shotgun Willies. I'm a church-going, Bible-believing, married man. I don't need a place like that. I don't think Rapid City really needs a place like that. But, as was said earlier, we have an ordinance that allows it within certain constraints. And I've heard tonight things that were said. For instance, adults will be sexually active. Well, ask the pastors out here the definition of fornication, and that's sex outside of marriage. So yeah, adults will be sexually active, but it's not considered proper, it's considered sin. As we attempt to drill down and tighten the noose, if you will, on an adult-oriented business ordinance, as Bonnie pointed out, we have cheerleaders scantily clad, and it's always about sexuality. You look at women's volleyball. They used to wear baggy shorts, but nobody came to watch the volleyball, so we changed the shorts to be more provocative so that people would come to watch. And I think if we are going to be so enamored with this change or these changes to this ordinance, then we should be looking at R and X-rated movies. We ought to be looking at the provocative billboards we have around town. You know, there is sex and sexuality everywhere we look. I am thankful that I'm not raising a young child right now, because if you turn on mainstream TV on the 3 networks, there are commercials that are oozing with sexuality. They advertise hamburgers that way. I think Brad brought that up last time, you know. And sorry, I'm just trying to give you credit. You know, I stole your idea. So, you know, if we truly believe that somehow making an ordinance tougher makes our city safer, then it's time to take further steps. And let's get rid of the sexuality on billboards. Let's get rid of the sexuality on mud flaps, on trucks. You know, it's everywhere. So where do we begin? And if we begin, where do we end? Now, for everybody present here tonight, and thank you for everybody who spoke. The pastors, I know them all, and they're good friends. And we see eye to eye. They know where I go to church. Brad and I go to church together, as a matter of fact. And I'm taught well in the church I attend. And I believe in everything the good book says. Those of us up here sat through 7 hours of painful testimony. So we're probably 7 hours ahead of many of you sitting out there in terms of what we understand. I don't know why there's any misunderstanding on the door, because we talked about the door for a long, long time. Aaron Johnson, the owner, who I might say is a good man. I've had discussions with him, and you can hate him if you like because of the business that he's in. But if you didn't know the business he was in, and you met him on the street or sat down and had a conversation, you'd find it difficult to hate him. And he has tried to run a business and keep it within the confines of the ordinance. One of the things we heard is that door is there to provide some modicum of privacy, if you will. But anybody in the place can look over the top of it. As short as I am, I could see over the top of it. Bonnie, if you were there today and saw it, you could see over the top of it. So what I think we're trying to do is legislate morality. And I'm not against that. But if we start it, let's not stop. Let's really put our hearts and our mouths together and our footsteps, and let's clean everything up and put things back the way they were, and maybe return some of the moral fiber to our country and try to unwind the decadence that we've seen. I have some difficulty with the language of the ordinance because it was ambiguous, it remains ambiguous, and in that 7 hours of testimony, I made this statement that I had heard some things that night that were deeply troubling in terms of sworn testimony. And I don't think we need to bend or twist the story to get where we need to go. We should be truthful up here. People should be truthful out there. And all we should have to deal with in here is the truth. So I would just caution people, let's not exaggerate. Let's not talk about what we don't know about. and let's make things meaningful, accurate, and true. I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. And as we proceed to additional discussion, I want to remind the council that this is first reading. We'll go to Charity Doyle.
Thank you. 3 words, 5-minute timer, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to remind you every meeting. Well, first of all, I want to say that I don't believe that prostitution is going on at Shotgun Willie's, but I will say that being married to a Rapid City police officer, prostitution is alive in Rapid City. And I guess my take on it is I would much rather have the girls have a safe place to do whatever they need to do for whatever reasons they believe they need to do it than resort to something else. So to that end, I guess am slightly grateful that there is a place for them to not have to resort to the streets. I am, however, in support of the door coming down, and I wanted to explain why. To me, it's a bathroom stall. It's what it looks like to me from the video. I was home with the flu watching the 7 hours of very agonizing testimony. But from a law enforcement perspective, I guess, I remember going through the Citizens Police Academy when my husband was making his career change. And some of the stories I heard from seasoned officers and detectives that had to do the undercover work just made my stomach churn. And I would go home and tell my husband, you are not doing that undercover crap, not happening. So being friends with a lot of police wives, and I'm thinking anything that we can do to make enforcement of that, there's going to be less need for them to frequent that facility because everything's going to be out in the open and on the up, and I think that's the position that I'm comfortable with. Thank you.
Woman Roberts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And during that 7 hours of agonizing testimony, one of the things that I kept bringing forward was this ordinance needs to be hammered down. This makes it more vague, more vague. We need to define what these issues are. One of the things that we discussed in length at that meeting was the differences between one officer's morals and another officer's morals, and how they may interpret the ordinance and how another one may interpret the ordinance. This does nothing for that. This just makes it even more vague. So I'm hoping that before it comes back to second reading, maybe we can outline some of these things. Thank you.
Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I can, I'd like to ask the city attorney a question, please.
You may.
Joel, can you, and I know you gave some instruction on this in some of the email as well, can you talk about some of the reason why the language, some of that language hasn't been more defined, and how enforceable and the precedent behind that? Some of that, if you want to call it vague language, I don't like to use that, but I think it's broad language, but it allows some interpretation. It doesn't hamstring our law enforcement. Can you speak to that, please?
Certainly. As I indicated in my correspondence with the council, I chose not to recommend that any changes to the definition of specified sexual activities be made, or simulated sex. That seemed to be where the main problems were. There was a specific reason that language was used in the ordinance. The language has been used in other ordinances, and I know that some of the council members certainly have concerns about it and feel it's overly vague, but the courts reviewing it have consistently found that simulated sex or specified sexual activities is not overly vague and provides people with sufficient guidance on what conduct should be prohibited. That was the reason it had been used. Obviously, when lawyers look at drafting ordinances like this, we look at what other communities have done. Regulation of adult businesses is something that has been litigated numerous times, and so we look for language that has been upheld by other courts and other jurisdictions that have addressed this issue. Again, in my communications with the council, I expressed the opinion that it is hard to define with concrete detail how every type of activity you want to prohibit. It is common when we write an ordinance to write it broadly, to make sure that we capture the conduct that is intended to be prohibited, and give the officer some discretion in deciding when a violation occurs. If an officer is exercising that discretion too loosely, then that is something that their supervisors will address. I would also point out, when you talk about violations like this or criminal prosecutions, there's really two levels of review before, in this instance, the council even saw it. The officer had to make a decision, is what I'm viewing a violation of the ordinance, and then it was brought to my office and we reviewed it, and similarly we reviewed it and made that decision as well. So there's two levels of review before it would even get to you. If we felt the officer had misinterpreted the ordinance, we wouldn't have brought the case forward. I will say, and I know you're all aware of this, but the dancer who was shown in the video that you viewed at the council meeting was also criminally prosecuted for the violation of the ordinance. And in the court of law, and the judge, the issue that was raised in front of the council about it being overly vague was raised to Judge Pahlke. She rejected that argument. She convicted the dancer and frankly told the attorney that was prosecuting her that after viewing the video, it wasn't even a close call, that it was clearly a simulated sex act. So I don't think that it's overly broad or vague from a legal standpoint, which is why I have not changed the language. However, I also made clear in my memo to you that if a majority of the council cannot support that or does not believe that ultimately it's your ordinance. But if you're not going to support the definition of simulated sex act or specified sexual activity, then you should discuss making a change. So the police officers, if they do go in and do another undercover operation, don't need to worry about that and be put in that same position again. But ultimately, you need to make a decision whether you can support that definition or not. Legally, I don't think it needs to be changed, and that's why I haven't recommended a change. But it's your ordinance. If you want to change it, you can certainly direct me to change it or just remove it from the ordinance so we aren't engaged in looking at that as a violation in the future.
Thank you, Joel. And if I can, Mayor, I have one last comment here, and I just wanted to urge my colleagues to accept it as it's written. Maybe there is some more discussion, but I believe the ordinance is well written. It's enforceable. It gives our law enforcement the ability to go in there and do their job without having to worry about, enforcing the ordinance. Now, we may have sent a mixed message, and I think we did when we reduced the suspension that our enforcement suggested, and I think that's why this has come forward. And I think what the city attorney has told us leading up to this and what he said tonight clarifies that, and it allows our enforcement to best enforce this ordinance. And so I want to urge my colleagues to, all of you, to unanimously support it. And on one last comment, that some of you have talked about some of the other activities that cheerleaders. From the video that I saw from Shotgun Willie's, I've never seen a cheerleader do some of the things that I saw in that video. So let me just clarify that. But the bottom line is, I want my colleagues to understand that, good and bad or right and wrong, you know it when you see it. We all know that if our daughters, for those of us who have daughters, worked at a place like that, we all would not be proud of that. I don't think anybody on this dais, I don't know, I don't want to speak for anybody, but I think the majority of us would say, that's not a desirable occupation for my daughter. So we all, the majority of us, the overwhelming majority of us, I think, agree that it's not good. And so what this ordinance does is moves our community in a direction of a reflection of what is good for our community. And I think all of us can agree that enforcing this ordinance is going to be better and good for our community. And I would hope that you wouldn't let other issues outside of these AOBs distract you from taking this necessary step to do the right thing for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple points that I just want to reiterate, and thank you for Alderman Laurenti for asking the city attorney to clarify the language and that the levels of scrutiny of any type of violation does go through more than just the police officer's discretion. So that's what makes me comfortable with leaving the language the way it is because if you try to tighten it up and you start a laundry list, there's the potential of missing a specified act that we would find distasteful. So by leaving it vague and over time, it allows the discretion of the officer to be reviewed by the supervisors and by the police department, ultimately by the city attorney's office, and it allows our citizens to actually set the course of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable over time. The main reason I'm supporting this is the city attorney, Joel Ledeen, has expressed several times that the language in this ordinance as is has currently been upheld in the courts. So I truly do believe that we do not have to consider any change to the language as a city council until the courts start looking at this differently. The only other point that I wanted to bring up was about the door. And Mr. Johnson, during the hearings, he did testify that the reason that he didn't feel the door was a problem at that time is because it did not violate the ordinance at that time. And his statement in the hearings, as everybody else has said, 7 hours that we sat through, he did indicate that if it was part of the ordinance, he would comply. So with that statement, I would find it hard to not support the door being removed because he's already given acceptance of it during the testimony that we sat through. So I will be supporting the amendment as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. We'll go to Brad Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep this short. After the 7 hours, I believe that the 3 pertinent points that these changes make fit our needs well at this time, and I appreciate your explanation again, Joel. It was very consistent with the conversation we had earlier today, and I'm going to support this motion and the first reading of this ordinance as written. I yield.
John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Joel, can I ask you one question here real quick on section 5.70-190 on the knowledge, where it says, let me get down here a ways. Basically, the operator has knowledge after violations, amount of violations have occurred. What amount of violations? 1, 2, 10? You know, I think that needs to be narrowed down to, or at least defined.
Well, and we're not trying to make it a strict liability. I mean, there has to be some, but what it gets to in the heart, and it was the same instruction that you were given at the hearing, although that was one of the deficiencies we identified, is that it wasn't spelled out. Mm-hmm. You know, there's 2 kinds of knowledge. There's actual knowledge and there's implied knowledge. Actual knowledge would be, in the example I've used, if a dancer went up to Mr. Johnson and said, I'm going to go on stage, I'm going to violate the ordinance, and he said, okay, you go ahead and do that. She got up on stage and violated the ordinance. That would be actual knowledge. That is going to never happen and be virtually impossible to prove. So it was always meant to encompass both actual knowledge and implied knowledge. And one of the ways you can show implied knowledge is through continual violations. Now, he can rebut that presumption, so it's not a strict liability like, say, alcohol, where if you have a violation or 2 violations, you automatically lose. It's just stressing that knowledge can be implied, and you can show that there's knowledge by demonstrating that there were multiple violations that the owner was aware of and did not take actions to correct that.
And that was a very good way to get around my question I asked, which was how many violations before we pull his
There
license?
isn't going to be a specific. It could be 3 violations. It could be 10 violations. I mean, at some point, if you have multiple violations, the question is, how long do you wait? We didn't want to specify a number of violations. It's not a strict liability where if you have 3 violations, you're going to be eligible or you're going to lose your license.
So who interprets this when there's
You would
1,
have
2,
to, as the
5?
council, decide whether or not they had knowledge. I mean, that was one of the questions that was in front of you, and in my mind, you rejected it.
I am just trying to figure out when this is going to come forward to us. How many violations before we say he had knowledge and it comes forward to us?
Under the amendment, it was also not clear who made the decision to issue the suspension. Under the revision, our office makes the decision to suspend or revoke. So ultimately, either I or one of my successors would make that decision. It's going to be a fine line between deciding, are there sufficient violations that I feel I can prove knowledge to the council or implied knowledge, and letting it go on so long somebody looks back and says, you had 15 violations, why didn't you bring this forward sooner? It's going to be a judgment call. And frankly, that's part of my job. It's not a fun part of the job, but I'm going to, or one of my successors, going to have to make a judgment of, is 3 enough? Is 4 enough? Obviously, the more violations there are, the more likely it is the council, I think, will find that there was knowledge of the violations. However, I'm not going to sit here today and say a specific number, because I think it's going to be dependent on the circumstances of the type of violations that occurred, the actions that the owner took. There may be 5 violations, but maybe after the first 2, they took corrective action, and I'm going to say, you know what, if I take this to the council right now, they're going to reject it because he has taken corrective action. But if after the first 2, there's 3 more violations and there's no corrective action, I would probably look at it differently and bring it forward, and you ultimately would make the decision whether or not that amounted. The idea, though, is if there is repeated violations, that can demonstrate that the owner had knowledge of the violations.
Will these violations be in a yearly basis, 5-year basis, 10-year basis, the life of the ownership of the business?
I will say, the way I handled it this time, there were violations going back previous years, but the license had been renewed. So I said that I thought it was only appropriate to go back until the last time the license had been renewed, within the last year.
Okay.
Now, and actually, I will clarify something that was said. The biannual actually is cheaper because it means they only be renewed for 2 years. So I would look back for the period of the current license.
And to clarify, biannual is not twice a year, it's every 2 years rather than
Correct.
1 year. And that revision was made, I think, last year, when the other license terms were changed to 2 or 3 years. Bonnie Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to clarify a couple of points. One is, if I said sexually active, I was just talking about that we were made to be sexual beings. I was not encouraging anyone to go out and sin. It was just that we're sexual animals, and so that's just part of how we were made. The other point I also wanted to clarify, for those of you that have not seen the door, is that to get into this little room, booth, or whatever you want to call it, you actually have to step up a step to get into it. So even though it looks like you could see over the top, you can't, because you're already almost a foot lower because you have to step up into it. So, so you cannot freely see into the room like I thought perhaps you could initially. So anyway, thank you. Let's vote.
Any further discussion on the motion on the floor? Everyone understands the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 41, Chad Lewis.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item number 41 is a request of Dr. Andrew Severson for an interpretation of the 1993 agreement with the city, and I move to acknowledge. Is that correct? Move to
go to a recommendation.
Recommendation, looking for a recommendation, I guess.
Well, I think you can either
move to deny, I guess.
If you want to say that you reject Dr. Severson's interpretation of the agreement, that it only applies to track 2, yes, you would deny it. Or you can move to approve that you support his interpretation that it only applies, the assessment only applies to track 2.
My apologies, I don't know if we got an exact direction on the motion we should make, so I'll yield the floor, I guess. I can't make a motion now.
We do not have a motion. I believe the recommendation. We have a motion by Laurenti and a second by Peterson to deny. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. 42, Richie. Can you read 42 into the record for us? Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 42 is the request to the mayor to authorize staff to work with Mike Gould and Larry Blody and to bring back a recommendation on a water main leaks and damage for the properties located at 610 and 701 Main Street, and I move to approve.
We have a motion by Nordstrom and a second by Scott to approve. Any discussion? And this is basically to authorize staff to work with the property owners and bring back a recommendation.
Mayor?
Yes?
I don't know, I don't think we need any additional comments from City Engineer Dale Tech, but just in case the council members need additional information, I think we're okay.
I think we're okay.
Yep.
We're okay.
Yep.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We've had a couple of council members step out. I think we do need to take a brief recess if everyone's in support of that. 10 minutes. We'll come back at 9:15. 9:15. We're in recess. We're going to reconvene in just a few moments. If everyone could please take their seats, council members and staff and audience. We are back in session, and we are on item number 43, which is the item involving the barriers from the intersection near Enchantment Road and Snoomer Road. And we'll first go to Nancy Jensen on item number 43. And please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Nancy, are you still here?
Yes, I'm still here.
Good evening, Nancy.
Thank you. I can't believe that I'm ever in this room ever again. It's been a long time. My name is Nancy Jensen. I live next door to the Enchanted Hills. I live at 5440 Plains Vista Court on top of the hill. I have lived on top of that hill since 1972, and I've seen a mighty many changes happen up in the neighborhood. I guess at this point, I just feel sad that we can't seem to get it together over this very little short piece of road due to, I guess, circumstances beyond our control. I wish I could go down there and figure out how to fix this problem so that we could all be happy. I think opening it up after 2 years ago, the council had unanimously voted that was going to be closed. They put up the barriers, and as far as I knew, that was working out. I don't even go down there, so, but I thought hopefully that was a solution to the problem. But now we have my neighbors closer to me who were very helpful when we were fighting Walmart being up on Highway 16 South, which was a ridiculous place for it. I'm very happy that Walmart is where it's at. Don't have any problem with it. But it's just sad that we can't come to some togetherness on making this work. I wish we had. Now, I have the highest regard for Curdall Rumbold, who asked me to sign the petition. And I did sign that petition, but since then I have done some real looking at it and saying, well, you know, if I lived down on the corner of Stumer Road and Enchantment Road, I would be devastated, totally devastated, if I had to live in that spot. And so I think we need to be fair to those people that live in that whole lower Enchantment Road section and work this out. I was looking for reasons 2 years ago from the fire department, the police department. Are there any reports anywhere that show that why didn't they oppose it at that time if they were not wanting it to happen? And this safety thing, I think it's safer to have it closed than to have it open. So I want to listen, learn, and participate, but I really hope we can resolve this issue and keep everybody happy. So that's about all I have to say.
Thank you. And we'll now go to Louise McPherson, also on item 43. Louise.
Hi, Louise McPherson, 5311 Dan Christie Lane, and I am in favor of removing the barricades on Stumer Road. I'd like to talk just a bit about the traffic in the area. I know there's many aspects to the whole problem. The original purpose of Stumer construction, I believe, was as a connector street to connect Enchantment with 5th Street and also Enchantment with Catron for development of that area and for access to that development. And another issue that doesn't seem to be talked about much is when Dan Christie at Catron, the reconstruction of that, we cannot make left turns now. A median was put in there. And I believe that when the DOT put the ban, or the median, banning the left-hand turn, they were assuming that Enchantment Road could go down to Stumer and head over to the intersection light at Black Hills Boulevard, which is much safer than going up and making a U-turn and quicker than going down to 5th. I believe that they thought it would be, Stumer would still be open when they put in that median, so we could have access to the light. I believe that traffic should flow like water, the path of least resistance and quickest. And anyone heading to the Walmart shopping area, which includes other things besides Walmart, if they're coming from downtown, 79, 16, or even 5th Street, they would take the 5th Street and Catron. To come down Enchantment Road and turn on Stumer to go over to Walmart is a traffic of great resistance. It is a windy road, and so I believe Enchantment would be used mainly by our neighborhood, and it is a handy, accessible way to get there. And anybody from anywhere else would take a straighter shot than our windy road. A lot of complaints that led to the closure of Stumer had to do with issues at the apartment, bright lights, noisy parking lots, heights of buildings. These are apartment issues, not a street issue. There are many busy streets in town. 5th, St. Pat, Jackson have heavy traffic. They do not expect closure to make their areas more pleasant and quieter. So I ask the council to consider the original purposes of Stoomer Road and to reopen it so we can have those original uses in effect again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise. We'll now go to Walter Carr, and for the minutes, this is spelled Kjar. Charlene. Good evening, Walter.
Good evening. Walter Kerr. I live at 208 Enchantment Road. It happens all the time. He did very well. My wife and I oppose the removal of the barriers on Stoomer Road at Enchantment Road. There's many reasons to oppose their removal, but I'll just stick to 3 of them. These barriers were installed as one of the conditions to allow Walmart to build on Stoomer Road. The City Council recognized that there's going to be a great increase in traffic from Stoomer Road to Enchantment Road as a result of Walmart. And now the area along Stoomer is filling in with a lot more businesses. The outlots on for Walmart are full now, I think. There's a new fuel stop down by 5th Street, and I've heard that there's going to be a new fast food restaurant opening soon. All of these add to the traffic coming off of Stoomer Road. The area that would be most affected by the increase in traffic, if the barriers were removed, would be from Stoomer Road onto Enchantment Road and actually on up to Dan Christie Lane. There would be very little of this traffic, as was pointed out before, that would continue up Enchantment Road to Mount Rushmore or Highway 16. My item number 2, homeowners take great pride in their property and in their neighborhood. We don't like to see litter and trash thrown onto the streets, and that was a big problem before the barriers were installed. Neighbors picked up this litter on an almost daily basis. I can only imagine how much more there will be if the barriers were removed now with the added building over there. And number 3, the discussion here today is that of convenience for some drivers by the removal of the barriers versus the burden of added traffic and safety on this section of a residential neighborhood street. Please don't allow this street to become a business loop. My wife and I oppose the removal of the barriers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. We'll go to Mike Beeson, also on item 43. Mike. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. I spoke to my representatives this morning. Hi, Charity, Bill. This is, to me, is not about Walmart, although I know that's kind of how it all got closed to start with. It's about access. I don't go to Walmart. That's not my reason for wanting to use that road, but it is access to Catron. That's our only access to Catron from that neighborhood, short of going further downstream. By closing that road, you've blocked access, if you will, to 2 apartment buildings that are right on the road. Instead, you're now driving us by 28 families further downstream. We're going to keep going. We have to go somewhere. So you block the shortcut, if you will, to Catron and Walmart and anything else that's going to be out there. Instead, we're going to drive past 28 more families. What sense does that make? It's about access. I also had a granddaughter living in those apartments. That blocked my access to my granddaughter. I had to go all the way around. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Kelly Douglas, also on item 43. And next up, after this, will be Alan McPherson, if you want to be ready.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I don't want to reiterate what Mr. Kerr said, but number one, the traffic from Stoomer Road on to Enchantment Road is, when I looked at it when it was open, and it was horrendous. The traffic was terrible. The blocking Stoomer Road with the barriers was a very, very common sense approach to the problem. And it doesn't seem to be a problem. If it's broke, not broke, don't fix it. And not fixing it would be removing them barriers. My wife and I and my kids and family are dead set against you guys removing those barriers. And that's about all I've got to say. The only other thing is, one of the concerns was emergency vehicles. There's a way to set the barriers and open up a small area to get through the barriers and put signs, emergency vehicles only. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Alan McPherson. And next up after Alan will be Mark Stolken. Mark, if you want to be ready.
My name is Alan McPherson. Mr. Mayor and council members, you have my statement in front of you in 5 letters that I will refer to. Stoomer was closed by the council because a small group of 10 to 12 people with an articulate spokesperson went to them and requested it to be closed. And it was closed because the rest of the residents were not aware of that meeting, so there was no opposition. Until 103 signatures were signed on a petition. 90-some% of those live in the Enchanted Hills. Many, many years from now, none of us will be here. So the decision that the council makes today is for us now and for those people in the future. Initially, Stoomer Road's closing was about the development in that area and Walmart. So Stoomer was partially closed for a while to allow emergency vehicles, and then it was totally closed. The real reason that led to the closure of Stoomer Road began about 2007, 7 years ago. There was 5 residents that wrote letters to the council. 4 of those 5 residents, the backside of their house faces the apartment complex. The council, the letters were about this: home values being diminished, landscaping not up to par, traffic, noise, privacy, people looking into their windows and backyards from the apartments, 3rd story instead of 2-story apartments, not the upper class neighborhood that they were told. So when they found Walmart was going to be built, that was the last straw. That is when the push was on to get Stoomer closed. As you've heard, Stoomer closure blocked our access to 5th Street, to Black Hills Boulevard, to Katrin. And just for the record, in those 5 letters, the word safety was never mentioned, not once. So I ask you to take the bullards down and open it up for us. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mark Stolken. And after Mark will be John Richardson. Good evening, Mark.
Hey, good evening, everybody. We've obviously talked about this quite a bit, and up until the Walmart being constructed. But I just want to read a real quick quote Let's start this off with. Residents from within Rapid City's central, south, and east side will have 3 routes to a large box store in this location: Highway 16, Catron Boulevard, or Enchantment Road, which is a steep residential street connecting 5th Street to Highway 16. The speed limit on this road is 25 miles per hour. Certainly, traffic on this residential street will swell, endangering children in this area, causing significant traffic hazards and decreasing value to the homes on this road. This was from Tim Rogers, the former association president of Enchanted Hills back in 2006. They're making the same arguments that we had for the placement of Walmart on the corner of Catron and Highway 16. As Nancy said earlier, she's one of these outspoken people that also came to the council, didn't want Walmart, didn't want it in their backyard, just like everybody else on the Walmart location where it is now. Most of the people on this petition, there's 53 residents in the Enchanted Hills subdivision, and to compare, there are 30 residents on the 200 block of Enchantment Road alone. The nearest resident that signed the petition was on the 600 block of Enchantment Road, and only 8 residents on Enchantment Road signed this petition. Regarding Eagle Ridge Apartments, there are currently 13 apartment buildings, 3 stories high with 8 units per floor. That's approximately 312 units. That's just and that's probably 312 cars. The main concern with the opening of this road is not the traffic that's coming from Enchantment Road onto Stumer, it's the traffic coming out of Stumer Road onto Enchantment. We've had quite a problem with, prior to those ballards being put up, of how much traffic was coming out of the apartment buildings. And I'll agree with what Mr. McPherson said. Yes, there was quite an opposition to the apartment buildings because it did add quite a bit of traffic to that area. And at that time, that was just half of the volume that's there now. I see the red or the light going already, but I just wanted to ask you guys real quick. Before you remove these ballards, you have to ask the question, what has changed? What's changed since 2011? You need proof that something's changed before these come down, and how your decision has changed since then. That's particular to a couple of people that are on the council right now. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. We'll now go to John Richardson, and after John, we'll go to Jay Alderman. John, you're up.
Good evening. My name's John Richardson. I live on the corner of Ridgeview and Enchantment Road. I just want to say I agree with a couple comments made earlier as far as being in favor of the removal of the posts and opening up the road. Being a safety issue for me, my sons, we have to drive around one way or go out on Catron the other. I agree with the comments about giving access to 5th Street through a traffic light to Catron through 2 different traffic lights. I think that was the purpose. I think the road was built with the intention of being a public street to be used. I don't see why you would connect it if it wasn't going to be used that way. I think the majority of the neighborhood has basically ruled in favor of this from the petition, and it just makes sense as far as a logic view, as far as, you know, having a public street for access, as was mentioned, and being able to use it to go either direction. I do not believe that I can predict the future, nor can the other people, as far as what the traffic will be if it was opened up. There's no study, there's no data. It was done when it was closed, and so the area is growing. When I moved in there wasn't any homes below me. Road expanded 3 times, they connected, Catron, Fifth Street. It would have been nice to block my road. Now I have garbage all the time too, there's all kinds of traffic, I can't stop that. This area is growing. You're gonna have more streets, you're gonna have more of them connected. And, you know, there'll be more people that wanna block more. We can't stop the growth, it's coming, that's the way it is in that area. I think that the best answer is to allow for what you originally planned for with these streets. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We'll go to Jay Alderman, and Penny, you'll be up next.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Obviously, we have a couple 2-3 minute limit, and it's hard to, of course, do justice to something that was a multi-year project. And as I mentioned, but I understand. In fact, there's probably no one that appreciates any more than I do what you're tasked with doing on a daily, monthly, annual basis, the challenges you face, trying to balance all of the public interests and personal needs that come before you as tonight with this topic. But you were tasked a number of years ago in trying to determine whether or not, or where Walmart, not when, but where it would be located. And you were tasked with approving that location where it currently is, has been constructed. And that was a public process. I commend you for that. It was well vetted out, and we all had opportunities to present. There's been some comment that there wasn't an opportunity, but there was. You were also tasked, coincidentally, right next door to Walmart, more or less, actually prior in time, to approve the addition of the multifamily, high-density family dwelling unit. Certainly, we need affordable housing in our community, so that was a good thing. That you took that task, you were challenged with that, and you made that decision. But you're also challenged, and it was brought before you that, you know, if you're going to do that, and of course, people didn't want the Walmart up on 16, it ended up down by us. When I say us, I mean mostly the folks in the Enchantment, Stumer quadrant or section. I'm sure there are other things in this community that I'm not aware of and I don't live next door to, so they're a little bit out of sight, out of mind. I acknowledge that. That's human nature. But this one isn't out of sight, out of mind, and it is coincidentally to a large box store and a very large apartment complex right there on the skirts or the edge of this quiet residential neighborhood. I would submit to you that you had, and to this day still have, an obligation to listen specifically to those folks that are most immediately impacted. It's one thing to come down the hill and have to drive an extra 2 minutes out of the way to get to Walmart because you can't go down Stumer. Guess what? I'm on that corner and I have to make that same 2-minute drive. We just went shopping there the other day. Walmart isn't hurting because Stumer's closed. The apartment complex isn't hurting because Stumer's closed. But thank you for taking into consideration, after you made those big decisions, which you were challenged with doing, thank you for considering the folks that were right there and are truly impacted. Folks up the hill are not impacted. Somebody in North Rapid or way out west or east in the valley, they're not impacted. We are. And you understood that. That was well vetted out. Plenty of time and opportunity for everyone to participate in that process and share their feelings, from emergency management services to legal to all of the constituents that you all represent. It all happened and it worked out, and we appreciate that closure, and we'd ask you to leave it closed because we knew what it was like before it was closed and even before Walmart opened up. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. We'll now go to Penny Alderman.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Penny Alderman, and I don't usually speak in front of large groups, so I'm a little nervous. I usually leave that to my husband. But I really felt compelled to come here today because really to speak to you as a wife, as a mom, as a family member, as a friend, and as a neighbor who happens to live right on the corner of Stumer and Enchantment Road. So I think that I can represent those neighborhood people that live right on the road that are directly impacted by the traffic that has been there in the past. And that's what I'd like to do today is talk to you about, you know, what was life on Enchantment and Stumer prior to the barriers going up. And there were really two main issues that were very, very prevalent. And I commend this committee for taking action back then. But just to remind you, the first and foremost thing was there was an enormous amount of litter. My home literally butts right up against it, and it was a daily task to go out and remove the litter from our yard, in which I witnessed cars throwing it on our yard. So it was a visual witness. And in an effort to not insult a lot of my neighbors in this room, a lot of that waste that was thrown in our yard, you literally, if I had a hazmat suit, I would have worn it. It was disgusting. And that was a daily occurrence. And my kids were subjected to it. They had to go down and see what was thrown in our yard. And it was very, very disturbing. And the second thing is really just the traffic. It was horrendous. It was not safe for my kids to go out and play ball in the yard for fear that something would fall out. My daughter, who was younger at the time, and I had vile things yelled at us. The traffic was just horrendous. It was not uncommon at all hours of the night to be woke up by squealing tires. Back in the day, we called it hot riding, up and down those streets. A lot of traffic violations. When there was a stop sign there, they ignored that. They would just blow through it. When there were barriers up that allowed for the emergency personnel to come through, they would just tear around those. There was really just no regard whatsoever for, you know, the signage that was up. So I applaud you for doing that. And lastly, I see the light blinking. I got in my car late last week and I drove from the barrier to the Walmart store into the parking lot and parked my car, and I timed it, and it was 3 minutes. And if you were to make a right-hand turn on Stumer at that Boulevard and drive down, it would take at least 1 minute. So we're talking about 2 minutes of inconvenience. And I am absolutely mystified that we would even consider opening up my neighborhood, changing the culture from a culture of kids being able to play on the streets to a high commercial road. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. We'll now go to Tim Vogel. Tim?
Well, thanks for staying awake, first of all. I'm Tim Vogel. I'm a real estate appraiser, and I've lived on Enchantment Road since 2000. And I live between where they want to do it, and I live between the homeowners association. The first thing I want to say is their homeowners association is Ridgeview and Panoramic Circle. It's not Enchantment number 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 3, 4, 5 is Enchantment Road. They're an entirely different association where they don't have the noise and traffic, their circles and their dead ends. That's where the petitions came from. They didn't come from 2, 3, 4, 5, which live on Enchantment Road, Stumer Road, Dan Christie. So that's an entirely different association. So when they say Enchantment Homeowners Association, it's not the only one. There's a bunch of them out there. So that's my first point. When I sat down to see the pros and cons and whether I would sign it and stuff, I thought about, okay, let's do a list. What would you do pro and con? Well, all I could think of was pro was it's going to take me 2 to 3 minutes earlier to get there. Con already was I got Highway 16, I can get to 5th Street, and I can get to Catron Boulevard. I can get to any of those. It's really simple. The other thing is if you open it up, you're building another fast food, whatever. Anytime that there's a chance to get out of a parking lot faster, you're going to go do it, whether you're driving through a residential neighborhood, whether you're going on a main street. If traffic's backed up, you're going to do it. You're going to add traffic to our neighborhood. We live on a very steep hill. We have people come down on bicycles, kids on little long skateboards. They go 40 miles an hour. They have a good time. We've got kids. In the wintertime on this steep road, it's icy. You can't get up and down it. People get stuck all the time. So I'm thinking That's not a good deal to put more traffic into our neighborhood. The other thing is emergency access. I hear this all the time. Well, if you have fire department, they're on Highway 16, they're going to come up 5th Street. They're not going to come down our neighborhood. They're not going to go through it. They're going to stay on the main accesses. It's quicker to get there. So emergency access, by opening it up, only changes the people living in the neighborhood. They're still going to turn on 5th Street, turn on 16, turn on Dan Christie to get to our neighborhood. The other thing was burglaries. Before they put it up, we had burglaries all over the neighborhood, house break-ins, car break-ins. When the deals went up, we still had burglaries. All neighborhoods have them, but they dropped drastically. They went to about a third of what they were. People had to put in alarm systems, did a lot of things, so that changed. I had 2 people that ran into cars out in front of my yard and tried to drive away. They came out of the apartment complex. Luckily, both times the cars were disabled. They couldn't drive away. I was out mowing the lawn. I had to run up, actually physically knock on the window, say, hey, where are you going? You ran into this car. And he said, well, I got to get away. It's time. So I put down all these things. I have more things. The lights are blinking, but I have a dozen or more things that are wrong with opening it. I only have 1 or 2 things that says why you should open it. And basically, it's convenience. 3 minutes of my life just changed because I got to go around. That's the only con or pro that you have. So thank you for your time.
We'll now go to Jim Phoenix. Good evening, Jim.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Appreciate your time, especially this evening. It's been an eye-opener, just like when we fought the Walmarts, the different areas for the Walmart. I'm Jim Phoenix. I live on 1332 Panorama Circle, way up in the boonies where nobody drives, and so I don't have all these problems. But remember when we built 5th Street, went all the way through to Catron? My God, we raised all kinds of cane because look at the traffic that's going to be cutting through 16 down to Catron, through our streets. That didn't ever occur. And I doubt if we really looked at the traffic patterns here, that it'd be that much of a traffic mix by taking these barriers down. Now, we've never done a traffic study, and I hear these people in the neighborhood that they're living in, they'd like to have a real nice, quiet neighborhood. We'd all would, especially us up on the hill. Yes, we've got a quiet neighborhood, but you know, if when people moved in down there, they should have realized that there is a road through here and there's going to be traffic. But I don't think the traffic is going to be that horrendous. I really don't. I'm sorry for the people that work in those apartments or live in those apartments that trash the neighborhood. That's life when you get a high-density environment. But I think overall, and I understand the 3-minute interval to a 1.5-minute interval, but you built a street there to service the community, and that street should be used. The barriers, I think, if you look at, I don't know, the police department and the fire department, I understood some time ago, was against those barriers. And I don't know whether if that ever come to fruition in these meetings or not, but it seemed like, okay, you've got posts there that could be frangible. That means the fire department or the police department with heavy bumpers could go up there and knock the posts down and get through there. But this winter, when we had a couple heavy snows, that section of road was not plowed out. It wasn't that good. I'm not talking about the ones in front of the houses, but the ones out there from the posts out to Enchantment Road. I don't think the service road was that well taken care of. So I'm looking at the safety factors. And again, you folks built the road, taxpayers paid for the road, and here we're putting up barriers, and I think it's not a good use of our monies or our engineering firms that did this study or built the road in the first place. So I'd say the barrier should come down, but again, I feel sorry for the people that live along here because I don't have to worry about that. I've got a very quiet road, and I'm sure there's a lot of people here, especially in the council, would like to have their streets barricaded off so they could have a real nice area for their kids to run out and play in the streets and not have to worry about traffic. So Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have 3 speaker request forms, so I'm issuing last call if you would like to speak and you have not filled out a form. We'll first go to Maren Hanson Ward.
This is not mine, but it's a belated. Thank you. Good evening, Councilman. My name is Maren Hanson Ward. I live at 306 Stumer Road, which is right on the corner of Enchantment and Stumer. I'm across, kitty corner across from Jay and Penny. When we looked at that lot, that house, there was 3 homes on Stumer. Jay's home wasn't there. We were told that it would most likely be developed into medical facilities. It was plotted for a nursing home behind our neighbor's lot, which is in between Stumer and back and forth. All that is done. It's over with. Walmart is there. You all know I fought Walmart. I lost. I'm cool with Walmart now. Eagle Ridge was there before Walmart. I woke one night, approximately 1:30 at night, to I looked out my window. The Rapid City Police Department was out there. There was a young man laying in the street, retching his guts out on my property. My property that previously a friend had said to me, "Wow, Maren, that's really cool. You live right next to a park. Drive by my house. See my landscape. See the condoms laying in the rocks. See the needles, used needles, broken bottles." Then they put the ballards up. Wow, cool. Walmart agreed to pay for the 3 and 3 ballards so that the emergency vehicles could get through. On a daily basis, I'm not sure what the number is, but on a daily basis, the police sat in front of my house and stopped vehicles that were not emergency vehicles from weaving through that. Mr. Alderman told me the other day that he watched as an officer wrote a citation for one car, as another car stopped at the corner, looked around, nobody's looking, quick, went around the corner and went through the ballards. So they put up a few more ballards, thanks to charity. They put up a few more ballards. Well, we can still get through here. Mr. Alderman's front yard looked like ours did before we put our sod down. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not fair for these people at the top of the road to steal our American dream, to steal our quiet neighborhood. Charity, I called your husband because I did not feel safe in my yard, in my neighborhood, in my $350,000 house. My neighbor lady was accosted verbally by a gentleman from Eagle Ridge. I see it's the red light. I can go on and on and on, and I get very passionate. But I beg you, do not take those ballards out. There's elderly people, there's children. One gentleman said we have a leash law. Do we put that leash law on our children? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
We'll go to Tonette Broom.
Hi, I'm Tonette Brown, and I live at 210 Enchantment Road, and I was a part of the original discussion of whether or not Walmart should come in. And one of the things that has been left out and just touched on by Miriam is the fact that at that corner right there is also a bus stop. Kids get on and off there. And unfortunately, those people are not represented here, those with the little kids that are getting on and off. So I want to ask that you vote no for the removal of those barriers. In particular, you allowed them to go up to help make those kids and that area safer for our entire community, for the growth of that community. Several people have mentioned that they wouldn't have moved into that community if those ballards weren't there. And chances are, if they come down, I won't be living there either. I would like to ask that some of you who have commented about an agreement of removing the ballards to truly sit in our shoes and think about, is the convenience worth it? Is it worth it? You know, my father used to tell me the only guarantee in life is death and taxes and disappointment. Please, do not disappoint. Keep the ballards up.
We'll go to Cradall Rimbold. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council representatives. My name is Cordell Rimbold. My wife and I live up in Enchanted Hills, and I sat here this evening revising the notes that I had typed up because of all of the sad stories that I've heard. At our annual Enchanted Hills meeting, it was decided that we would take around petitions to see if people wanted the post removed on Stoomer Road. I was one of the people that was delegated to do that. And we collected over 100 signatures. I hope you do not disregard those more than 100 signatures. We could have spent more time, and I feel as though we could have easily doubled the amount of signatures that we had on those petitions. I've listened to stories this evening about drunks in the yard, about burglaries, litter, you name it. I was an investigator. I retired with the Rapid City Police Department after 28 years of service, and you can ask any of the officers here and they will tell you that those situations happen in every residential area in Rapid City. We investigate homicides in affluent neighborhoods as well as the less affluent neighborhoods in Rapid City. I'm not going to get into all of the bad situations because they've been addressed. What I would like you to remember as City Council representatives, a couple of key points. We have several hundred citizens who would like those barricades removed. You have over 100 signatures on a petition. Please do not ignore those petitions. Also, blocking those roads is a safety factor for emergency personnel. I heard one gentleman get up here and say that emergency personnel will use Fifth Street or Catron Boulevard or other areas. What happens if there's a patrol car in Enchanted Hills and he gets a call that a baby is choking in the apartment complex and he can't get through those barricades? Does he drive all the way around to Fifth Street and Catron Boulevard? The other thing is that road was paid for by city taxpayers, yet we are not able to use it. The other thing that I think you have to be concerned about is what happens if tomorrow, if you decide to leave those barriers up, and tomorrow you get calls from citizens in North Rapid, Robbinsdale, or West Rapid, and say that they get too much traffic, too much litter, other problems in their neighborhood, and they want barriers to be erected on their streets. What do you do? I think you're setting a dangerous precedent. In closing, I know the red light is on. One of the comments that I heard as I was going around was that I was told that one of the city council people or the city council representatives said that if they open Stoomer Road, Enchantment Road, we'll see an increase of 20,000 vehicles per day. I heard that a couple of times. They must be using the same calculator that the government uses to figure out our income tax. Other than that, I have nothing else to say except please remove those barriers. Thank you.
We'll now go to Glenda Meeks. Good evening, Glenda.
Good evening. My name is Glenda Meeks. I live on 307 Stoomer. I really wasn't compelled to come here, but my neighbor was visiting with me, and I moved into this neighborhood relatively later. And of course, when I moved in, I talked to the contractor, and he told me that Walmart was going up. And I, of course, was not going to purchase a home. But he assured me that he had talked to the council here and that you had told him that you would be putting up a the barristers or ballards or whatever you call them. That relieved my mind. I didn't have a problem with Walmart. I don't have a problem with Walmart being there. I don't have a problem with actually the apartments there either. I live directly right on the corner of Stoomer. And I understand the concerns from the folks up the hill. I mean, it is really nice to be able to go right down there, take a right, and go to Walmart and do your shopping. I have to drive around. And I've made those kind of compensations in my life, and that's quite okay as well. However, it is a residential area. It has always been a residential area. And then Walmart came in, and now we're wanting to put a main road over beyond where we have these commercial buildings and put it into a residential area. As a nurse, I don't think that 2 or 3 minutes is going to make a difference in a choking child's life. I think they can get there relatively quickly. And as a sister of a retired police officer, I know that they can put gates that will open in and out of that area, so I don't think that really is the point. I think the point of the matter is that the people that are in this community were told one thing. They moved here, they thought they were moving into an area where they would be able to raise their children. They have a place where their children can go for a school, to wait for a school bus. They have a place where their children can play on the sidewalks. If their balls go into the road, they're not going to get hit. They have a lot of options, and those are those reasons they chose to move in those areas. It's not like Enchantment Hills is a high commercial area. It's not that that road has to be made into a major freeway to get out to these other areas. You have Catron, you have Fifth, you have that go right down to Minnesota. You have so many ways that you can get to and from Walmart and to all of those other businesses without having to do Stoomer Road. So I really feel that you need to remember that you did make a promise to the community, and I would hope that you would uphold it. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment is now closed on item number 43. Richie, could you please read item 43 into the record for us?
Thank you, Mayor. Item 43 is a petition to remove the barriers from the intersection near Enchantment Road and Stoomer Road as offered by the Homeowners Association. Mayor, if I may make a motion, is to direct staff to remove the bollards at the intersection of Enchantment Road and Stoomer Road. if I get a second, I'd like to hold the floor.
We have a motion by Nordstrom and a second by John Roberts. Richie, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. There's just a few things that I need to address to the public. I know this, not everybody's going to agree with me, no matter which side we're on here. But what it boils down to me for is the proposition about safety. There's some other employees that we have not heard from yet from the city staff, and if I may read just a couple of sentences from the chief of the fire department. He's really concerned about the emergency response time, and in his professional opinion, the road should be open to provide for timely response in incidents in the neighborhood. He also trusts engineering and planning to do that go into newly developed areas of our city that the city streets are designed for safety, access, egress, and response times for city emergency vehicles. It's also part of my thought is that a lot of the city streets that I've had the opportunity to visit in the neighborhoods is that the same concerns that have been brought up by the people that do not have bollards in their neighborhood have brought up the same kind of concerns that you have that do have the bollards in there, or previous to the bollards being installed, as being the public safety issue, and it really boils down to me for a criminal process that needs to be addressed. I've spoken with our Public Works Director on that very issue, and he says he wish he could design, but he can't design streets to be a deterrent for crime. The testimony that was given tonight was a wide range of issues that we have to deal with, experiences not only on Stoomer Street, but in other streets of Rapid City. If we could design those streets to eliminate that, I would really be in support of that. But currently, under the technology that we have and the expertise that we have, we can't do that. And so, therefore, I'm going to support the chief of police and the fire department in their efforts to have those bollards removed, because I want to see those vehicles, those city crews, and especially our first responders, have that opportunity to make it to that child that is having that choking incident or that heart attack in a quick, appropriate response time. Again, I apologize because not everybody is going to agree with me, but in a position like this, I have to take in regard to what's best for the city. And with that, I'll yield the floor.
Thank you, Richie. We'll go to Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One thing I'd like to say in response to Alderman Nordstrom's comments is that I would hope if this were a safety issue that our public safety officials would not have waited for the backs of a group of citizens to file a petition about access, that they would have come to us and said there's a problem here, or never have recommended approval in the first place. And not only was it approved in the first place, it was extended after the first approval wasn't working. So please tell me that our fire chief and police chief would tell us that this was a safety hazard. Now, first of all, I want to thank everybody out there for the civility tonight. I had a couple of phone calls today that weren't that, so I really appreciate people showing up and hearing their neighbors out and knowing that you guys are all in the same neighborhood. I don't live there, but I care about a lot of people, both uphill and downhill. And there are really only 3 of us up here that had anything to do with this issue when it began so long ago. I was just a resident that got involved with the process because I heard the publicity and took up the flag, if you will, to get involved. Mayor Quaker was on the council. Alderwoman Peterson was on the council. And I, like many others, chose to get involved. Now, there seems to be a lot of reasons why people think the bollard should come down. And in my take is that we have a very talented and dedicated fire department and police department that have signed off on this. And like I said before, would have told us if this were going to be a problem. I can't imagine that they would have decided otherwise had it been. But here's what it boils down to for me. There was a promise, a commitment made by this council. A lot of us weren't up here, a couple of them were. And to remove the bollards would be to go back on that promise. This was on the agenda for many, many, many meetings for a very long time. It was in the paper, it was on the news, it was extremely public. Anyone, uphill, downhill, across town, had the right and responsibility to get involved if this was something that they cared about. Most chose not to. And based on the people that did get involved, it was more than 5 to 10 people that I keep hearing. There were a lot of people that took an interest in this. There were a lot of concerns brought up. You've heard many of them tonight. This was yet, for these neighbors that got involved, this was yet one more traffic generating use, commercial use in their neighborhood that they were going to have to deal with from there on out or move, as some people have aptly put it. They met with the developer, they met with city staff, they expressed those concerns. They were part of the process. They were not demanding, they were asking for some kind of solution. They were afraid. Things were already bad and they were slated to get worse. As a result, 4 different options were presented to these people that were in the process. And what was interesting is they chose the least expensive option to the developer in an effort to be a good neighbor to Walmart and to welcome them in and say, okay, you know, you've worked with us, we're going to work with you. It was really a cool process to witness. I was there for most of those meetings, not having a stake in it, but being interested and involved in the process. So these people came on board with Walmart. They welcomed them to the neighborhood in exchange for not allowing that commercial through traffic. That was a stipulation. And this was the trade-off for the size of the building, the skylights that the people up the hill were going to have to see on top of the building, the loading dock on the west side of the building that they didn't want to have the view of. There were all kinds of issues that they were finding with the building, but this was the trade-off. And they said, you know what, if you can just keep that commercial traffic out of our neighborhood, we're going to be okay with this. We'll learn to get along. And it worked. And this was approved as a package by the council. I think it was February 22nd of 2011. Council gave them their word that they would keep this street closed to through traffic. And if we vote to take the bollards down now, right or wrong, I mean, I get it. There are valid arguments on both sides of it. I really do. But right or wrong, it means we go back on that promise, we go back on that commitment. And I know that in this day and age, people aren't very trusting of their government. And I think this would go a long way in keeping that word. It might go to rebuild a little bit of what's been lost over the years. I yield.
Bill Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pushing the wrong buttons up here. Excuse me. If I could, I'd like to ask Assistant Chief Carl Jagras a question. Carl, I understand that Chief Mike is hiding somewhere, and he said that you'd be able to talk for both the police department and the fire department. And I would just like, for the record, I know there's been letters and whatnot, I'd like you to weigh in with your opinion, please.
Chief Maltaverne did link a memo, which Mr. Nordstrom read several parts of. And in terms of public safety for response time to crisis calls, whether it's from the neighborhood to Eagle Ridge Apartments or Eagle Ridge Apartments to the neighborhood or vice versa. Either way, the barriers are going to increase the time by approximately 2 minutes for us to get from one point to the other. And that could be significant depending on the nature of the crisis call that we're dealing with in the future. So that's public safety in terms of access and egress from the neighborhood. So anytime that you can have more access points into a neighborhood and out of a neighborhood, the better in terms of response time. But then I think the other issue that many of the neighbors alluded to that you need to take into consideration in general public safety is the traffic volume. If you have a residential area and the traffic volume is going to increase substantially, then the safety factor for pedestrians, children, et cetera, is going to change. So on both sides of the issues, you have risk factors. I can tell you that if you choose to remove the barriers, historically we have spent quite a bit of time in the Enchanted Hills neighborhood doing traffic enforcement. Over the past 6 years, I'm looking at approximately 350 to 400 citations that were issued in that neighborhood. Somebody spoke of the emergency access only when we had kind of the serpentine driving through the neighborhood. At that time, we were really trying to educate the public, so most of our traffic stops were warnings. We'd gone through and worked with management of Eagle Ridge to inform their tenants that that was emergency access only, but again, it's for some people, it's the path of least resistance, and there's many examples of lack of voluntary compliance with that concept. So, but what I can tell you is that if you do choose to remove the barriers, that we can prioritize traffic enforcement again in that neighborhood, especially for the time period when it first occurs, because I can tell you that you're going to have some apprehensive neighbors, and they will be appropriately hypervigilant to traffic violations in their neighborhood, and that will cause us to need to spend more time there. So,
Bill, you still have the floor.
Thanks, Carl. I appreciate that. And, you know, earlier this evening, I said, we sit up here and we listen to everybody. We truly do. And we listen to people on both sides. It's always emotional. And I don't think anybody spoke tonight who didn't have a real passion for what they were presenting, both pro and con. And oftentimes I'm asked, well, Bill, what do you think? What do you think? And I say, well, I think I'm going to listen carefully and make up my mind as I go, because I certainly don't know everything. And we didn't hear all the residents up there, but we heard a wonderful cross-section. We heard arguments, pro and con. And I don't mind saying, I am torn on this. I really am. You know, I would like to just lean towards emergency services. God forbid, you know, for those people who live down at the bottom, where response time could in fact be longer, that if a child were hurt or an adult, I mean, you know, we see emergencies every day, and lights and sirens, you know, both on the part of the police department and the fire department and the ambulance service, you know, and none of us would like to be caught in that situation or somehow responsible for that situation where maybe somebody was put in a worse position because of response time. At the same time, I look at this, and I don't mind saying there were some things that I heard tonight, and I thought, I really don't buy into that. I don't see Enchantment becoming a shortcut from 16 all the way down to 5th Street. There's too many curves. It's too steep. And there's just too many's, you know. So I don't think the shortcut would happen. But I do agree that for all those people down at the bottom, there would be a sudden increase in traffic. And I think it would be nice. Let me pose this as a question, and if I may pose a question to Dale. And Dale, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but with my limited knowledge just from listening up here about traffic engineering, it would seem that a viable solution, if we could wave a magic wand and money were no object, if Dan Christie were in fact opened back up and had a light, and there were some sort of restriction then on, help me out, the one to the south of that with the light.
Black Hills Boulevard.
Black Hills Boulevard, thank you. You know, if the roles of those two streets were reversed, where the people at the bottom and the top had a way out onto Catron, it would seem to alleviate some of that potential problem.
Dale Tech.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, if Dan Christie were open, certainly would help the flow of traffic in and out of the neighborhood. However, Catron Boulevard is a state highway, and the Department of Transportation made it quite clear that the approach spacing for those two intersections don't meet state standards. So they were very particular and very committed to not allowing a full access movement at Dan Christie due to the proximity of Black Hills Boulevard. The city, unfortunately, can't do anything about that. We can't require that or override the State Department of Transportation on their route to make that type of a change.
Okay, so that being said, we are in that position where it's either bollards up, bollards down. And you know, we've had halfway across, and enough people disregarded the fact that it was supposed to be for emergency vehicles only. And I know I was up there early on, and you folks who had your lawn driven over, I saw the damage. And, you know, but every one of us up here represents a certain faction of the city. I live in a relatively nice part of the city. I have trash on the street too. And sadly, I think it's from the residents who live there. I mean, pizza boxes and hamburger bags and all those kind of things. And I know if and when I see it, I'm apt to chase people down. I put on my police helmet and away I go, and because I don't like people trashing my neighborhood. And I would ask everybody, you know, and for those watching too, no matter where you live in the city, when you see somebody who's desecrating your part of the city by throwing trash in it, and so often it's not, you know, I think one of the things I've heard tonight, we'd like to put a lot of the blame on the apartment dwellers. And I had apartments that went up behind my old house, and yeah, things increased, negative things increased. I would ask everybody, keep your eyes and ears open, and, you know, be part of an informal neighborhood watch and report things like that, because it needs to stop in our city. Speeding needs to stop. Pedestrian safety needs to be increased because people stop at stop signs, not just roll through them. And then people need to quit throwing trash out the windows. We live in a nice place, a nice city, but it takes all of us, I think, to be involved. And I'm going to yield the floor, but I'm absolutely torn. There is no easy answer to this, and no matter what we do, yes or no, somebody's going to be upset.
Charity Doyle.
I just want to make one last ditch effort. Our last council meeting, somebody up here said, it's amazing to me that a previous council was involved with a prior decision and that we are not going to follow that. I'm just hoping that holds true tonight.
Bonnie Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor. I went and drove in through the neighborhood today. And I think no matter what decision is made tonight, that improvements need to be made. If those bollards stay up, we need to make that area look nicer. It doesn't look good. If they come down, we need to take time and devise other traffic calming strategies throughout the neighborhood. So I don't think it's as simple as saying yes, they're up, yes, or not, because we need to do more with what's there. One of my concerns is, well, obviously we know the traffic study said, you know, that's the way it should be, that it should be open. And I believe that a political decision was made back, and it was actually a week before I was on the council, to have the stipulation that Stumer Road, you know, that be closed there. One of my concerns is that when Stumer Road is fully built, because still designs for another apartment building to be there and office space, and then other commercial areas to be on Stumer Road that are not there now. And so that's concerning about what's going to happen with all of that traffic. The safety issue, as a nurse, I would say that 2 minutes of oxygen loss, whether it's a child or an adult from the heart attack, that is a big consideration. Plus city tax dollars of requiring extra fire departments and stuff so we have better response times. My other question, like everyone else up here said, I live in the West Boulevard area now. We have, you know, the same issues that were discussed. And also I lived for 19 years in Carriage Hills, and we were robbed twice. Beer bottles and booze bottles were thrown about. Even, and worse yet, we had rattlesnakes, which were a threat to my children. And deer blinded my dog. So every neighborhood has issues, no matter, you know, what we do. So I really, the 2 points that weigh on my mind are the safety issue, but also the commitment that the council made in 2010 when they did the stipulations that that part of the road was to be closed. So I can't really tell you how I'm going to vote at this moment yet. But again, no matter which way it goes, this is not an easy decision because you have, different needs. So thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the motion on the floor, I'm going to repeat the motion. I will. Give me just a minute. The motion on the floor is to remove the barriers. We'll now go to Alderman Estes.
I was trying to backtrack that finger as fast as I could. I'm not sure I really want to speak on this, but, I got to tell you, I got a piece, we could use this piece of paving in my ward. I've got a gravel street over in West Boulevard, and they just die to have this paving. But, I lived on Enchantment. In the 200 block, and if I recall, on the 200 block, the corner of Enchantment and Stumer, the last house is 255, and then I think on the other side of the street is the Alderman's. And I really don't see whether the bollards go down or not, how it impacts anybody that lives on, I guess if you live right on the corner of Stumer and Enchantment, you'd be impacted, but as you go up Stumer, looks to me, everybody's got to come down. That's the only way out. And we all have different opinions here, but to me, the real winners of this is if these bollards go out, the people in the 200 block. Because if you do, I know you're shaking your head, but if you have the added traffic and they're coming down to do what you want them to do, they're going to turn. They're not going to continue down. Well, you shake your heads, but we don't know. Well, and I look at the traffic study that was done, and that gentleman recommended that Stumer Road would remain open for easy access. And I don't know what would compel I think any part of town you can have drunks and trash and stuff, but what would compel the people from the apartments to drive into the neighborhood? Well,
Brad,
Yeah.
Brad, we're done with this part of the back and forth. If you have a specific question,
no,
you can ask the
I'm
question,
just
but-
sitting here. Well,
Right.
I'm just what I was doing is reading this report, and it said that it does not appear that cut-through traffic would be likely given the lack of incentive for the people to go into the area. So anyway, it's an interesting problem. It is a public right-of-way, and I don't know exactly how I'm going to vote either, but I do believe that, and what's weird is it's a neighborhood. The people that are going to be using your streets are your neighbors. It's your friends and your neighbors. Well, I'll yield.
Charity Doyle.
Thank you. I just thought, Mr. Mayor, that I'd clarify a point. They're not concerned about their neighbors in Upper Enchantment coming down and accessing Stumer, Mr. Estes. They are concerned about commercial traffic coming down 5th Street, jogging through the neighborhood to get to Walmart, which is easier than it is to go all the way around to the lights. They're also concerned about traffic from the east side of the bollards coming onto Stumer and turning right down into Enchantment to hit 5th Street. And that's the route they took before. I used to walk that route all the time. And yes, my dog was on a leash, and she almost got taken out multiple times. But there was a lot of traffic, and it was an unbelievable amount of traffic. It didn't seem to make sense. But when you look at the number of units that were coming, there's a high concentration of units in that apartment complex, and that's the route that those people were taking. And when they couldn't get there, they drove through people's yards. So it's not what you think. It's not their neighbors up the hill that are going to be the problem. It's the city promising that there would be no through traffic. So.
Alderman Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Call the question.
Question has been called. Are there any objections to calling the question? Seeing none, we'll proceed to the vote. Everyone understands the motion. An aye vote, a yes vote is to remove the barriers. A no vote is to keep it as it is. All in favor of removing the barriers, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. Roll call, please.
Lewis. No. Doyle. No. Wright. Oh, he's not here. Sorry. Scott. Yes. Nordstrom. Aye. Roberts. Aye. Clayton. No. Laurenti. Aye. Estes. Aye. Peterson. No. Motion carries 5-4.
Thank you, everyone. We are now on items 44 through 47. Public hearing is now open for these items. I do not have any speaker request forms. Public hearing is now closed. We will proceed with items 44 through 46. Can we have a motion to approve all three? We have a motion by Scott, second by Nordstrom to approve 44 through 46. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. We are now on non-consent public hearing item number 47. Chad, can you read this into the record for us?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item number 47 is the second reading of ordinance 5986, an ordinance amending section 17.06 of Chapter 7 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, rezoning within described property as requested by the City of Rapid City for rezoning from low-density district to public district for property generally described as being at 818 Anamosa Street. I move to approve.
We have a motion by Lewis to approve and a second by Roberts. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We'll go to our Finance Officer, Pauline Sumption, for item number 48, bill list.
There are no additions to the bill list, so the total is that which is before you at $5,737,083.84.
By Lewis, second by Laurenti. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. We have a motion to adjourn. We have a motion by Nordstrom and a second by Clayton. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.